Dr. McCullough, and thank you so much for coming in.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm so pumped for this interview.
Thank you. You're the best cardiologist in the world, maybe. Definitely in the country. You've done all that. You've taken COVID and found the cocktail. But I just have one quick question. Can you possibly make something where if me and you are having a conversation right now, where somebody doesn't pick up their phone? Just for 1 minute. They don't go feel for their phone. They don't look around for their phone. They just have a conversation.
I love it. I'm actually grabbing my phone to put it on airplane mode so I'm not interrupted. You're right. How many times do people grab the phone per day? It's hundreds of times, isn't it?
Yeah, like why can't you just say, hey, Pete, how you doing? Hey, Tom, how you doing? Why can't you just do that?
Do you remember the days before cell phones?
Yeah, I remember my friend Franco. If you had a car phone, one of those big car phones, and you were in there, everybody wanted in that car.
Yeah.
And people actually had conversations.
But I think I got my first mobile phone of some sort in 1996. But let me tell you, before cell phones, you basically went into work. You did whatever work you're going to do. You had an inbox, you had an outbox, and then you went home. Yeah. And remember, there was no email back then. So that you actually could not do work when you went home. You went home, you played with the kids, you went jogging, saw your spouse, watched TV. You actually couldn't do work. Now everybody is on 24/7. There is the evening session of emails and phone calls and text. It's nonstop, and boy, has this been a generational change. Do you know before our generation, for decade after decade after decade, human existence was in paper and pencil, paper and pen. It didn't change. So we are the change generation.
I always say this to Rob. When I had an engineering firm, I had this one older gentleman. He worked on Miami University. We had AutoCAD. We had all this software. He would not use it. We went and did this big hotel called the Breakers. Nobody could fix it. Everybody's like, use AutoCAD. This guy for 3 months, pen, paper, octagon. Guess who fixed it? The guy with the octagon and the pen and the paper.
Yeah. Because he understood it.
Yeah.
That's the challenge. I think that, all the wonderful advancements that computers have brought, I can tell you as a doctor, I've been frustrated. Many doctors of my generation would tell you the old paper chart was better. We used to walk into a room, we'd have a tab. It would say patient notes, the next one labs, the next one EKG, and we can literally just look at it and see the information, look at the patient in the eye, show them the EKG, show them the x-ray results, and we had it. Now it's all electronic. Can you imagine a big, thick file of PDFs completely electronically disorganized with cover sheets and fax cover? It is a mess. Electronic medical records are a mess. My goal is before the end of my career, I want to walk into a room and have it be just like Mission Impossible or just like Iron Man or the Avengers. I want to wave my hand and I want to see information go up in the air in holograms. You're laughing, but I want to see EKG up, echocardiogram up, hit it, heart catheterization, look at the patient, have the patient be bedazzled with all their medical information, and then make decisions. And then I want all my thoughts to be meticulously transcribed into a note and move on to the next patient.
Well, according to Back to the Future 2, we were supposed to be there.
Yeah, what the heck?
Well, I have to tell you, if there is a lag in bringing information technology forward, it's in healthcare because it's still a slog every day. The doctors, even on the way here, I was logged into the electronic medical record and I was handling things. Here I was. I should have been enjoying Good Morning America or something, but instead I was, in a sense, electronically slogging. And I think there's a wonderful opportunity to actually use graphics and use data and really good voice recognition to capture our thoughts and our intentions. Why not use video cameras? You know what really frustrates me? If you go to surgery, morbidity, and mortality rounds, and I've done this at a major medical center, a long time in my career, they never show videos. Here they are doing operations, and we see a description. Well, I got to this, and then the bleeding started in the liver. Well, why don't you show a video and show us what the bleeding looked like? What did you do to stop it? There's no pictures and no videos. It just drives me bananas. Why does the electronic record give a condensed compilation of a video of a surgery so we can actually document physically the surgery?
Why do you think that is? I mean, we can send a rocket to Mars, or, you can send a rocket to space and come back and land at the same place and reuse it, but you can't do that. Why is that?
Healthcare seems to be just a bastion of incompetence. Outside of the physicians and the nurses and the technical edge of delivering healthcare, all the support is not there. I mean, I think the people designing the great systems must be working in Hollywood, or it's pretty clear that Iron Man's got a good setup. So does Tom Cruise. But as a doctor, I don't. I mean, I want the same thing. I need to be able to look at holographic things and spin them around, and it's just not there. And in healthcare, for some reason, there's a lag. We even have 3 layers of Citrix WinFrame and keep logging in, and then the system logs you out again, and it's just it's awful. It's been a giant drag on healthcare, electronic medical records, and it should have been a major advancement.
Do you think that's because some doctors don't want to go against the grain? They just want it to be like it's been for the last 50 years? No?
I don't blame the doctor. I mean, you just saw me here. I was the one converting files.
I mean, not you.
USB.
I mean, just in general.
No, it's not. No. This isn't the doctor is the master user. I had a clinic a few years ago where I had to open up the electronic record. I had to open up one cardiology system for EKGs, another one for heart catheterization. I had to open up an email program. I had to operate 5 programs simultaneously. Who has to do that in their job? Doctors are actually super users of computers. Doctors aren't the problem. It's the infrastructure that we have to live in.
See, and then on the opposite side, like me, watching you, I would think it's the doctors that don't want to go against the grain. They like what it says in the textbook. They don't want to change anything. They're used to Windows 7. We're going to keep it at Windows 7. You know what I mean? That's what I thought.
Well, I think part of that is true. I think it's an old saw, or in many ways it's an intellectual trap. Do you know, as we all get older, we naturally think the way we did things when we were younger was better? Yeah. Do you know that? Do you know that every single old person says, when I was your age, we had to work harder, we had to walk farther. Remember walking to school in a snowstorm? You remember all that, right?
Shoveling snow?
Yeah, we had to work. And your generation is a bunch of lazy hooligans. Yeah. Do you know that statement has been made for decades upon decades, centuries upon centuries, forever? So what is it? Are we progressively declining every single generation, or is it just the viewpoint of people? And I think what it is as we get older, we have a comfort zone. And you mentioned the guy using the pen solving the problem. His comfort zone was the pen, the sundial, the slide rule. Whatever the comfort zone is, we gravitate to the comfort zone, and we naturally get uncomfortable with technology of doing something. Isn't it true with older people using cell phones, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? People are naturally uncomfortable. A little kid picks up a cell phone and can start a live stream on Instagram and can be making emojis and all this stuff, and the rest of us are frozen. So I think it's a part of aging, this failure to adapt to a new environment brings us back to our comfort zone, which is where we were in the past. But some parts of a comfort zone, I think, have not been replaced. A good example of that is reading. Remember, reading a book has been in kind of our human repertoire of things we do as an educated species for centuries, millennium, right? The only thing that's changed now is reading a screen, but it's still reading. And it still boils down to reading and comprehending. You can't get away from that, right?
I miss my newspaper. I want the newspaper like usual. I still get it, but I miss just the newspaper every morning, the actual physical paper.
Were you ever a paper boy?
Yeah, I was.
You were?
Yeah, for like 30 cents. My mom made me do it.
Oh, man.
Unless I went to if I wanted a Happy Meal, I had to wake up in the morning and deliver papers before school.
Man, I tell you,
throw them.
My first paper route, me and my older brother, Tommy, it was Buffalo, New York, the Courier Express. Oh. We used to have the green box out in front of my house on Forbes Avenue. Anybody in Western New York listening to this, you'll know what I'm talking about. We were 1 block away from Ellicott Creek Park, and the Courier Express guy would come, and he'd slam that big wad of papers, big block of them in our box. we'd go out there as little kids, and we'd have our mittens and our jackets on, and we'd dig through them. Then we'd carefully take all these papers, load them up in our sack, and then we'd make our delivery, and we'd deliver it. Now, up in Buffalo, New York, it's got to be between the screen door and the inner door, right? It's got to be there. Otherwise, it's going to get soggy out in the snow. And then the big thing was on weekends, we went collecting. And we'd tell Mom, listen, Mom, we're going collecting. And that's when we got to put on our belt, the belt that had the little slide device for each coin. And so remember, there's the quarters and dimes, and we'd have the belt on as if we were going to the OK Corral, but we were going collecting on our route. And we'd go through each house, and we had a little ticket stub. They paid, and we'd give a ticket. There was no greater satisfaction for an 11-year-old or 12-year-old kid to come home with a big, heavy, holster full of quarters.
You know what happens in Pennsylvania? You ride your bike, if you have a bike, or if you're walking, and you throw it and hope they don't have a dog, and then you don't get eaten by a dog when you throw the paper. And then when you go to get paid, your mom takes it. And if you got in any type of trouble, you get half. And remember the dogs?
Yeah.
I used to throw that paper. Like, you go to one place, nice dog. Next place you go, that dog's ready to eat that fence, to eat your face off.
Just throw it, go.
For 35 cents, throw it and run.
You wonder what dogs are really thinking about. I'll never forget one time in Buffalo, New York. The two activities we did as little kids is we delivered papers. We had the Courier Express paper route, and then we'd shovel snow. And that was the great entrepreneurial activity. Mom, we got a snow day. That meant money time.
Oh, yeah. We wanted a blizzard. We wanted a blizzard, right?
Not only did we have time off, but it was time to shovel snow. So we would go out there, and we would stake out these routes. We knew there was a vulnerable old lady down the street, and she needed us to shovel out.
And you tried to get there before the neighbor did.
Yes, and we had to get down there before the neighbor, and we'd knock. We're here to shovel the snow. Like little, kids with little rosy cheeks, trying to be as cute as we could to kind of get the deal, right? And I'll never forget, I went down there, and we were going to shovel of snow, and this just monster of a German Shepherd, I think the dog was bigger than I was, he just lays into me and just chomps my forearm. I mean, we're talking a full jaw.
But I'm telling you, it even happens there.
And I'll never forget, as a little kid, those teeth and the strength of a German Shepherd jaw on a tiny little kid, and I was a smallish kid, was tremendous. I thought the dog broke my arm. There were these... it went through, as a kid, my mom used to put layer upon layer upon layer. It went through, I think, everything. I ended up having these deep bruises corresponding to the dog's molars and canines. Must have been for like 4 weeks.
I was just going to say, you actually have the dog's teeth in your arm. Now, right now, you could call that street cred, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it was that deep bone bruise. But you know what happened? And this is actually all in my book, Courage to Face COVID-19, just a little intro to my life. So as a kid, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and my dad lost his job. He worked in a factory, and our family fell on hard times. And out of desperation, we moved to Texas in the 70s. We had kids, we're packing up the car, and we're going to Texas. Again, back then, no internet, no way of finding out. The rumor was there were jobs in Texas. And so we went to Texas.
Pull up Doc's book.
On a rumor. And we packed up the station wagon, and all 5 of us went. And as soon as we got across the border,
all the station wagon.
Yeah, the Oldsmobile station wagon. We got across the Red River. The first town we hit is Wichita Falls, and we land in Wichita Falls, and we set up our camp at the Tradewinds Inn, and we're in one room together. And my dad's gonna find a job and save the family. So so that's how we got started. I mean, starting high school there. And but the point is, we picked up paper routes because that's what we knew what we could do in Wichita Falls. And the paper route in the Wichita Falls was like what you described in Pennsylvania. Now, that was wide open. There was no paper box. They just dumped it out there. The wind was blowing. And there, what you needed is rubber bands, because you needed to wad the paper up and rubber band it to make it a throwable missile. And then the technique was ride on your bicycle. Remember the old bicycle with
Huffy?
With the Huffy? Yeah, and then you got to go no hands, and then make that twist, and then launch.
Yep.
And see what you can do. And it was a real skill. I remember coming home, my hands were so black. And just washing my hands forever, the newspaper print. These were the things, that became ingrained in our minds.
Do you remember if you were late, they would tell your parents?
Yep.
Like if they didn't get their paper on time, they would come tell your parents?
I remember these old guys. These old guys with pot bellies wearing their furry slippers and the robe, hands on hips, waiting for the paper. And if I had made a little different route or was a little bit slow, something happened. A dog sent me off my course. He could be waiting for that paper, and boy, would we hear it.
Those cats aren't fun either. The cats, they can claw you too.
They can. Dogs are afraid of cats in general.
I heard that.
Yeah, they don't like them.
Because they don't fear them, right? They don't sense the pheromones in the cat. The cat just wants to go do its thing, or
I think the swipe of the cat. You never know if a cat's clawed or declawed. That swipe is so fast. There's no dog that stands.
That's a Mike Tyson, right? Rob, pull up the colleges, because I got have to show them. Next one. Scroll down. Oh, scroll down. Look at all this, Rob.
All right, so let's go through.
Yeah, read this.
Oh, there's a lot here. So.
No, don't. I'm going to get tired.
Baylor, Texas Southwestern, University of Washington, University of Michigan, Big Blue, Missouri, Kansas.
Baylor, Texas
those
A&M.
are some big-time schools there, yeah.
Big-time schools.
How does that happen? Doctors are the most trained and educated professionals in the country. We just are. From the time I graduated from high school, which was 17, to the time I was fully baked as a doctor, 17 years.
Wow.
I had 6 years of my life where I slept in a hospital every third night.
What made you want to be a doctor?
From the day I was born, I wanted to be a doctor.
Did you see something on TV?
No, I knew I love science, and one of the most noble applications of science is to try to help somebody feel better. And it's just, so many doctors and nurses say that they just knew. They just knew. It's just something about it. I can't say that I laid out all the career options and I chose this or that. I knew I was going for it from the very beginning. I was the first one in my genetic line that had become a doctor. We had a doctor marry into our family, married my dad's sister, but I was the first one along that genetic line.
You said your dad was a really good chess player, right? Or played chess.
Yeah, my dad was.
Isn't being a doctor similar? If you kind of think about it in a weird way, playing chess and being a doctor is kind of, you got to make the right move.
That's interesting. I've never put thought to that, but you're right. You have to know your moves. Clearly, in surgery and procedures, you have to know your moves. But there's something about chess that really seems to be a separator. People who can play chess, who can really play it. You know what I mean?
Extreme concentration.
Concentration, thinking ahead. My dad not only played chess, he went to chess tournaments where they had the clock, and the clock and they make a move. And I remember as a little kid watching my dad and the move, and then the swiftness and the firmness of popping that clock and you're putting the other guy on the clock.
Oh, when they hit the top of it?
Yeah, they pop it. It's like, okay, you're on the clock. And then the other things the guys did to distract each other. So my dad played in these chess tournaments. But not only that, but back in the day, 60s and 70s, my dad played chess by mail.
How do you do
that? Now, there you have some pen pal that could be somewhere in Russia, and these postcards would come in, and you'd set up a chess table, and nobody can touch it, because when the card comes in, then you move it,
and then you send it back?
And then you send it back.
Wow.
And so each person, and you can imagine as a little kid, we're tearing through a house. We always lived in small houses. And boy, my mom says, if you knock over that chess table, and Dad loses the position of the pieces because he's waiting for the postcard from Yuri in Czech, the Russian republics. We could mess him up. But the discipline that it took to do things, people nowadays play chess on their phone, or the kids engage in chess.
Not the same.
But it's fun.
It's good.
It's fun to reminisce. All of this is structure. It's background for what we're facing now, which I think everyone would agree are unprecedented times.
This episode is brought to you by Fiji. More than just water.
This is not just rock. It's ancient volcanic rock that filters tropical rain, giving it double the electrolytes and its signature soft, smooth taste. It's not just water, it's Fiji water.
This episode is brought to you by Let's Get Checked. Are you the man your father was? Recent studies have shown that men's testosterone levels have dropped substantially since the 1980s at about an average of 1% per year. Think about how old your father was when he was born. For example, if he was 30, your testosterone levels could be 30% lower than his. Low testosterone levels can have all type of health effects on men. It can affect your mood, sex drive, memory, muscle mass loss, you name it. And yes, low testosterone is more common the older you get, but it can affect men at any age. So let's talk about today's sponsor, Let's Get Checked. You can order a testing kit that will be delivered to you in a discreet packaging with next-day delivery. Once your sample arrives in the laboratory, confidential results will be available from your secure online account within 2 to 5 days. So, if you want to test your hormone levels without having to leave your home, visit trylgc.com/MSCS Media and get 25% off your test using the code MSCS Media. The link is in the description at the top. And what made you want to go into cardiology? What was it about that? You had all the options in the world.
I trained in medicine at University of Washington in Seattle, which was just a notch or two above the Harvard programs. I interviewed at Harvard for my residency and Johns Hopkins and in the famed Ivy League schools, and UW was just ahead. To this day, University of Washington has the largest medicine and surgery programs in the United States. Most competitive to get into, I think, because it's very good academically, but plus people want to live in Seattle, right? Who wouldn't want to live there for 3 years and hike the mountains and do all these fun things and ski? So it was very competitive to get in. I was the first one in Texas to get in at UW probably in 10 years. I was very fortunate. And when I finished, it was very common back then in the 80s to do service. Many of my classmates went into the Army or Navy, military. Many became CDC officers. That was a very common thing to do. So I went a route where I did rural service. So I got stationed in a small town in the northern part of the lower peninsula of Michigan, about 8 hours away from Chicago, probably about 7 hours away from Detroit. I mean, you're basically out there. Me and Chuck Williamson. Chuck came from Duke. He was doing the same thing.
That's the boonies.
And you have to really plug in because there's no help up there. There's no specialists in town.
That is the true boonies. We talk about the boonies.
Yeah,
that's the
and you're
boonies.
up there. That's cherry country up there. And they actually gave a house for me and my wife to live in. Said, here's a house. They gave my wife a job.
They're always nice in the boonies. They're always nice.
And those are the 3 hardest years of my life. In the third year of it, I did negotiate to be able to come down to Ann Arbor, go to graduate school at the University of Michigan. But it was through those 3 years of general medicine, I did it all, that I had concluded a large segment of internal medicine was cardiovascular disease. It was either people developing blockages, needing bypass surgery or heart catheterizations, or it was all the inputs to it, which included high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, genetic factors, and back in the 80s, early 90s, there really wasn't much in the way of obesity. Back then, there was only about 10% of patients who were obese. I remember seeing a lot of patients in the office, flat bellies, and studying the inputs to cardiovascular disease. And what I told myself was 2 things. I said, 1, I want an area of expertise because in research in medicine, it's almost all done at the specialty level. It's very important. It's not done at the generalist level. It's done at the specialist level. And I said, 2, I'm starting to see the real importance of computers and modern mathematical techniques coming out in the literature. Because before modern computational analysis, what was in the medical literature was simple observations. Doctors observing something, writing it up. And once we got to, in fact, when I went to University of Michigan that year, I took survival analysis under Steve Selvin, who came from California. The logistic regression had just been basically discovered. And what these techniques allowed is to look in a data set and then look at one factor and be able to mathematically hold all the other factors equal and look at the independent effect of a factor. This was very important. So let's say the outcome is a fatal heart attack. We could analyze how important really is smoking and high cholesterol and high blood pressure and diabetes poorly controlled and gender and age. And we could study multiple factors in an equation, and that allowed us to generate odds ratios, or what's called relative risks, and we could see the relative independence of things. That was a breakthrough, and that was all occurring. It wasn't just University of Michigan. It was all over the country. It was really exciting times. So when I went to graduate school, I went there at the right time, and I learned techniques, and I developed an understanding that in the end became essential. I trained in general epidemiology. Epidemiology is the study of the distribution and determinants of disease. Well applied. The origins of epidemiology was all infectious disease epidemiology. So I was well positioned when this pandemic hit.
Yeah, and right here, scroll down, Rob.
Yep.
Right here, when you're talking about the correlation between the heart and the kidneys, this guy wrote this in 21. You wrote this a long time ago. When you came up with that correlation that the kidneys and the heart are connected, and that creates the disease. How did you come up with that? And can you elaborate on that? Because I was really interested when I read that. I never thought about that. But then when I think about it a little bit more, I can understand it, but would like to hear it from you.
I was in the cardiac catheterization laboratory as a fellow. And a cardiac catheterization laboratory is like an operating room, but it's for cardiologists. And it's like an operating room, but on steroids. What can be done in the cath lab kind of blows away the operating room. It's very elegant. We use catheters. We make physiologic measurements. We image the body. We're able to get wires and balloons and instruments up through the vascular system, do a tremendous amount of work, and then get everything out through the same hole and put pressure on it and put a Band-Aid. I mean, it kind of blows away the operating room.
How do you do that?
It is an amazing, I think interventional cardiology is still one of the most elegant, incredible areas of medicine, and it's brought so many advancements. But I was training under a fearless leader, William O'Neill, who's considered the father of modern interventional cardiology. And we're in the middle of the night. This guy was having a heart attack. We were doing a new technique at the time, which was opening up the artery, getting blood flow. The traditional way was just give medicines, give blood thinners, and cross your fingers. We're like, no, we got to get the artery open. So this guy in his 50s, we got the artery open, and it was wonderful. He looked like he was going to be saved from the heart attack. I was the doctor taking care of him in the coronary care unit, and I watched him slip into renal failure and die. And I asked Dr. O'Neill, I said, this is awful. I said, how often does this happen? He goes, it's the darndest thing. He goes, we can't predict it, but when it happens and people get into this cycle, it's fatal. And I said, really? Nothing's known about this? And it turned out that there was relatively little known about it. So I studied this intensively. I made this become my project. The first paper I published on this was in the American Journal of Medicine, and it was called Acute Renal Failure After Myocardial Infarction, Risk Factors and Relationship to Mortality. It became the most frequently cited paper in the American Journal of Medicine for over a decade. I mean, you knew when I hit it, and then it was one project after another, and then the whole field built out. So what we've learned is that the heart and the kidneys are in constant communication. There is a whole series of hormonal systems that are keeping the organs in balance. There's obviously hemodynamic flow between the two. The kidneys are regulating blood pressure. The heart's regulating pumping of the blood. Critical hormones are flowing back and forth between the two organs. And so they help each other in health, and they bring each other down in disease. And what came out of this is what's called cardiorenal syndromes. They're classified. We can now study them. There are blood tests and urine tests, in vitro diagnostics that's come out of this work that's been quite valuable. There have been drugs. There have been revolutionary drugs now that improve both heart and kidney disease.
Because they go up or they go down together.
Go together.
That's amazing.
So
you never think that.
Yeah. So it was a breakthrough.
I thought it was huge. That's why I brought up.
Yeah,
I thought it was
it's
huge.
a breakthrough understanding. So in this field, to this day, I'm the most published person in this field in the world in history. I have another distinction. I'm the most published cardiologist in the field of nephrology. So people think I'm a nephrologist, but really I'm a cardiologist. But I've always maintained my board certifications in medicine, and I've always maintained them in cardiology because I like breadth. And it's been said that a specialist in his or her field is very deep, but a generalist is very broad, but the distance is the same. And so the challenges are the same. It's just a matter of, and I like both of those dimensions. You know, an ER doctor, a general practitioner, family doctor, internist is broad. A specialist, like a retinal,
the specialist that the PCP referred you to,
right,
and then that specialist refers you to 17 more, you mean?
Right,
oh,
because
gotcha.
of the depth. So I actually like both. I pride myself on being generally knowledgeable. And what I tell the junior doctors I said, not only are you trained to be a doctor and you're going to help patients, but you will be called upon to help your family. And I can tell you, if you have a big family, now you're from Italy, big Italian family, I know how it is. You guys talk all the time. Doctors in the family are going to become these central figures because everybody calls them for
every
advice
time there's
help.
something wrong. Or hypochondriac. My cousins are the biggest hypochondriacs in the world. They'll go build a house and fall off a ladder, but they don't want to tell their wife. They get a cold, they're calling every doctor on the planet. Stuff, they'll break their hand and still go to work. But they get a stuffy nose. I need a doctor. I got pneumonia. I mean, it's that funny. 3 more questions, then we'll get to the big stuff. One, is cholesterol real? You know, it's been in the medical journal and others. Some say that cholesterol is a bunch of BS. Others say it's real. It plays a factor. I mean, you're the best. You know, remember you heard that, like before it was like cholesterol, you're going to have a heart attack. And then it was cholesterol is a bunch of BS.
If we took all the published manuscripts about cholesterol and heart disease and we put them on the roof of this building, the building would collapse. I mean, the weight of evidence is massive for cholesterol causing atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. It's there at the scene of the crime. If we actually take a scalpel and we open up the blood vessel, cholesterol is there. It's blocking the vessel. So it's true and related. Now, in terms of heart attack, it turns out that everything we know about heart attacks, who's going to have a heart attack or not, about 50% of it's explained with the established risk factors: smoking, cholesterol, diabetes, obesity, family history, high blood pressure. The other 50% is not yet explained. In fact, the genetics are pointing to things that are not related to those risk factors. There's pro-proliferative factors and others. And so that's the challenge. So people will say, well, listen, George Burns, he smoked all the way to such and such an age and he was fine. Or someone's dad smoked and, they never had heart disease. And so what we have to have is this tolerance for the fact that in clinical sciences, we never really have truth. What we do is we use inferential thinking to get closer to the truth. We are studying a very complicated thing. In medicine, we don't have laws. Remember in physics, there's the law of gravity. I mean, it's a law. You can rely on it. In physics, there are laws that you rely on. In engineering, you had an engineering firm. You rely on laws. You rely on them. I just flew on an airplane here. We relied on laws of, that in physics that apply to aerospace engineering. In medicine, and that's all based on deductive thinking. If there's a law, then this, then this, then this, then this, then we can get a plane and it should take off. In medicine, we never have that because the human body and biological systems are so complex. Down to the molecular level, we can never know all the factors. So we carefully observe, and then we use inferential thinking, meaning, we are drawing this conclusion, but it's subject to change. And people get frustrated with this, especially dietary research. People say one day chocolate's good for you, chocolate's bad for you.
I hate that.
Chocolate's good for you, it's bad for
dietary
you because dietary research, right? And so it's generally moving in the right direction. But this is important because in the clinical sciences, because there really isn't a declaration of truth, there isn't a declaration of, well, I have the truth and you don't. There can be no declaration of information or misinformation or disinformation. It can't be. There's simply the state of the science of where it is, the observations that we're making, and then our conclusions. So with respect to cholesterol, yes, does it play a role in coronary heart disease? For sure. Do drugs that lower cholesterol, do they reduce the risk of coronary heart disease? They do. Are people concerned about cholesterol-lowering drugs? They are. Why? Because statins, the most commonly used drugs, about 15% of people really do get muscle aches on statins. What's the problem? 100% of people in life get muscle aches. So 100% of people, before they take a statin, they're almost certain that they're going to get muscle aches on a statin because they already have muscle aches.
They must have heard it on the news.
And it just drives me crazy in the office. I'll say, you have a sky-high cholesterol, your arteries are being blocked, you need a statin. And then you can just watch people recoil.
They go,
They're like,
oh my God.
They're like, can't I go on a diet? And I said, well, what have you been doing for the last 50 years? And it just keeps going. And it's the toughest thing. And what I tell people is, listen, do a careful inventory of how you feel. And then take a statin. Take it at night. Don't take it with other things. And just chronicle how you feel. I personally take statins. 96% of cardiologists take statins. As published by a paper in the American Journal of Cardiology by O'Keefe in the 1990s. About 96% of cardiologists take statins. I've run marathons on statins. But yes, they can cause muscle aches when there's other drug interference, when you're sick with other things. So it's not a bad idea if you have a cold or a medical problem to just hold the statin while other drugs are on board. If statins have delayed clearance from the body by the liver, and the statin alcohol, the early breakdown products, if they build up a muscle, they'll cause muscle soreness. But because of this complicated process, there's even a diagnosis that I put in the medical record: statin intolerance.
Oh, I was going to say Advil.
Statin
I was going to say
decline.
take some Advil.
And statin, and people really, they want to go to the mat on statins, and it frustrates us as cardiologists because they save lives. And I tell people, listen, we're going to end up seeing you in the cath lab and putting in stents and doing bypass surgery.
Just take it.
So being the dumbest guy in the room over here, what is that? Explain. Is that
a statin would be the original one was Mevacor, and then Zocor, and then Lipitor,
okay.
and Pravachol. I think the best statin, the one I use most in my practice, the one that actually I take myself, is Rosuvastatin, which is otherwise known as Crestor.
I would have thought you would have said Lipitor.
No, because Rosuvastatin, more balanced, probably less of a chance of getting the muscle aches. And then I take another pill in the morning called ezetimibe, and ezetimibe helps the body clear some of that cholesterol out through the GI tract so you don't recirculate it. Both of those drugs in my career used to be $300 each per month. And it was the hardest thing because I'd say, gosh, these are really the best drugs, but they're so expensive and grandma can't afford them. Thankfully now, and I want to say for the last 10 years, they're $3 a month.
Tomorrow there'll be 3,000.
So I'm telling you, I am subscribing to the cholesterol hypothesis. Now, I may get burned. I may end up getting stents and bypass surgery and other things later on in life, but the preponderance of the literature suggests no, that's out of my equation right now. When people die in the United States, it's known that 40% of the time is due to heart disease, 40% of the time is due to cancer, and 20% other causes. But when people die in our country, 99.9% of the time, we know what they have. It's not a mystery. It's not a mystery. This is very important. Someone that's our age and they die, well, if they had a history of heart failure, or they had a history of cancer, or they took a drug overdose, or they were alcoholic, or had a motor vehicle accident, it's known. It's known. What's very unusual is to have somebody, they died, without any antecedent knowledge.
And as a cardiologist like that, when you see a 32-year-old perfectly fine, he works out every day, and boom, heart attack and dies, and you go look into it, and you don't really see anything. How do you wrap your head around that?
Well, you made the right conclusion. It's the heart. So when you see somebody go down, and they lose consciousness right in front of you, and they hit the ground, they don't even put their arms out, right? They hit the ground smack. And you've seen these athletes go down, right? And then you'll see a quivering, just a couple quivers. Those are just some convulsive, reflexive actions. That is the human brain going from full blood flow to zero blood flow. And zero blood flow within a matter of seconds takes somebody to the ground. And then within a matter of minutes, typically it's about 6 minutes, it's finished.
And that little shaking you see is basically the little bit left of the antagonist shooting down and firing down, and go like that, and then
Exactly.
that's it. Right.
Exactly. And there can be a few gasps, what's called agonal gasps.
Agonal, yes.
But we have witnessed so many of these video reels now. I think everybody is getting used to seeing it's what we call sudden cardiac death. And there is a set of criteria. It's called the Utstein criteria for sudden cardiac death, which says if somebody dies and there's no premonitory symptoms in the last 24 hours, and it is the heart until proven otherwise. And what happens, the most common scenario is the heart goes into an abnormal rhythm called ventricular tachycardia, which is a rhythm coming from the lower part of the heart, and it is like a seesaw going very fast. And I can tell you when your heartbeat right now is probably 60 or 80. Normally between 60 and 100 is normal. Ventricular tachycardia can be 180, 200,
180.
220.
Wow.
And when the heart is quivering at 220, it's just not having enough time to pump blood out. So ventricular tachycardia will take blood pressure down, let's say to a systolic blood pressure, which is normally, let's say 120 millimeters of mercury. We'll take it down to 60 or 70. That gets one dizzy. That ventricular tachycardia, if it's not terminated, and the most common way to terminate is to shock the heart with electricity. If it's not terminated, it degenerates down to a little quiver called ventricular fibrillation. We abbreviate it VF. VF. And so VT and VF are still shockable. So if we blast it with electricity, that's the reason why it's important to get those defibrillator pads
Right
there
there.
and pop it. We got to pop it. If that VF persists for just even a minute or two, it goes to asystole, flat line. And when there's a flat line, it doesn't matter. We put in IVs, we give atropine, epinephrine, we give every drug in the world. We can't bring people back. So sudden cardiac death is all about recognizing it's probably VT or VF and getting the pads there ASAP. If you're ever on the plane and someone goes down, I've been called to so many air emergencies. I can't tell you how many. I said, get the defibrillator and fast, and you got to really move. Get the shirt open and get ready to blast. The defibrillators nowadays, we put them on there. You hit the button, it'll analyze. It'll tell you if it's VT or VF. It'll tell you if it's shockable. It says analyzing, clear, boom, and it shocks. So the automatic defibrillators that do this are wonderful. And studies show you can teach a 6-year-old kid to do this.
Well, so there's no real conclusion as to why. Just the answer is have defibrillators around.
Well, now the why. The why question.
Yeah.
The why question is answerable. The ventricular tachycardia, the thing that kicks this off, goes typically around a scar.
What makes that start?
Scar.
The scar.
Well, here's the thing. Normally, electricity starts at the top. It depolarizes the heart. It's really an elegant organ. The flow of electricity depolarizes in such a smooth way, and then it finishes its depolarization. The heart contracts, and we're all good, and then it starts up top again, and it goes again. But if the electricity goes down and it finds an area of scar or an area where the electricity can conduct through but slowly conduct through, some electricity will conduct slowly through, and when it gets through the scar, it finds the surrounding tissue now ready to accept the charge, and it goes up and around the scar. And that's called reentry. And as soon as reentry occurs around the scar, ventricular tachycardia, and when VT takes off, it depolarizes up and down. So it actually makes the upper part, the sinoatrial node, go to sleep, and VT takes over. So it's scar. So what can cause a scar? Well, someone who's had a prior heart attack. So if you have a colleague and he's on the golf course and said, yeah, I had a heart attack 6 years ago, and he goes down, well, the answer is it's probably the scar from his old heart attack. Someone who's had a prior bypass surgery is likely to have a scar. And so we know that if the heart, its pumping function is sufficiently weak and there's a lot of scar, that we actually put in an automatic defibrillator. There's now like pacemakers in. So there's an important variable everybody should know called the ejection fraction. That's the amount of blood that the heart ejects with each beat. Normally, it's 55 to 75% of the blood is ejected out because the heart's a pump. It doesn't empty out completely. But when the ejection fraction is below 35%, chances are there's a scar there, and VT and VF could happen. So anybody sitting with an ejection fraction below 35%, after a sufficient period of time and it doesn't improve with drugs, they end up with a defibrillator.
Why do just, I mean, I don't know if it's because of advances in technology and years of experience and people like you, but why do you think there's so much more, I just feel maybe it's just out there more, irregular heartbeats, kids with irregular heartbeats. Why is that? What is that? Like, was that something that's always been there and now we're noticing it more? Or something caused by some adverse,
This podcast is brought to you by Monster Energy. Tear into a can of the meanest energy drink on the planet, Monster Energy. It's the ideal combo of the right ingredients in the right proportion to deliver a big bad buzz that only Monster can. Monster packs a powerful punch, has a smooth, easy drinking flavor. Athletes, musicians, co-eds, road warriors, metalheads, geeks, hipsters, and bikers dig it. You will too. Monster Energy is more than just the green OG. Monster has Monster Ultra, Juice Monster, Monster Hydro, Rehab Monster, Dragon Tea, Monster Max, Muscle Monster, and many more. Buy on Amazon, buy on Walmart, or go to monsterenergy.com and believe me, you'll find a place. Unleash the beast. Monster Energy.
Something.
That's an interesting observation. I'd say irregular heartbeats, certainly sudden cardiac death. Doesn't it seem like we're kind of on edge right now, that every time we open up our phone or we turn on a news feed or go on social media, somebody else is going down? In the last 2 days, Megyn Kelly's sister went down at age 58. We had former Secretary of Defense Ash Carter went down at age 68. We had a radio host, Mr. Goff, died on air at age 55. I mean, so I don't know if we're just primed and this is just happening or if it's more common. Irregular heartbeats. So someone's saying, well, now I'm sitting here and my heartbeat is irregular. The most common scenario there is atrial fibrillation. It's abbreviated AFib. And everybody knows about AFib who's listening to this because it's the most common abnormal heart rhythm. 15% of us are going to get it. My father-in-law had AFib for like 30 years. And what you need to know about AFib is that AFib begets AFib. Once people get stuck into it, it's very hard to get out of it. So we like to give people a chance of getting back to normal. We end up having to shock the heart, use medications. We can use internal catheters to perform ablation, try to reconfigure the electrical circuitry to keep it in sinus rhythm. And that's important because if it's in sinus rhythm, people are less likely to go into heart failure. And if they're in sinus rhythm long enough, they're less likely to actually form blood clots. When the heart is quivering, it's blood clot time. And when blood clots form in the heart and they eject out of the heart, that causes stroke. So atrial fibrillation and stroke go together. So anybody listening to this, if you hear your next aunt out there has had a stroke and you want to be a real medical, ace, you say, did she have AFib? They're going to say, wow, were you listening to Tommy's podcast or what? I mean, that's awesome.
You might get out of trouble, buddy.
But AFib is related to stroke, and that's what requires blood thinners. Wow. It requires blood thinners. So we actually use blood thinners, and the blood thinners are very effective because in AFib, the blood clots are not that big. So someone in AFib that's in and out of AFib, we say, listen, you got to go on blood thinners. The modern-day blood thinners that we use are about 90% effective, meaning we can neutralize stroke. So they're very, very effective. If I had AFib right now and I was in and out of it, I would take blood thinners.
Which one would you take?
The ones we use, there's a class of them. They're called NOACs, or novel anticoagulant agents. And they would include Eliquis. They would include Xarelto, Edoxaban, Pradaxa, about 4 of them. They replace Coumadin, which is good old warfarin. Warfarin, it took a lot of adjustment. But the point I was going to make is people ask, well, what causes atrial fibrillation? Yeah. Well, clearly older age does. Having kind of beat up heart valves, a thickened heart, high blood pressure over time, obesity, if you've had prior bypass surgeries or stents, anything that kind of beats up the heart over time, AFib would be a common bedfellow, if you will. But what's been learned over time is the single greatest thing that people do that lead to atrial fibrillation, if they stopped, they could actually potentially avoid it, drinking alcohol.
Really?
Yes. So many people don't want to hear that. But there was a randomized trial. It was done in Melbourne, Australia. It was a great trial.
Australia does the best. Well, you know them better than me. The ones I read in Australia.
They had these drinkers. The Australians like to drink those big beers. They randomized them to, listen, stop drinking or just continue as you are. And they reasonably followed the protocol. And those who stopped drinking had markedly less atrial fibrillation. So I can tell you, I tell all my patients, if you can do it, become a teetotaler and don't drink a drop of alcohol and see if we can't get some stability here.
Why does alcohol affect that so much?
It's a toxin for the heart. So alcohol's...
everybody always says liver.
No, but it's toxic to the heart. It's toxic to muscles too. It's a toxin. It is known that people who drink a little bit every day do have lower risks of heart attacks. That's true because alcohol induces the good cholesterol, HDL. But alcohol does raise blood pressure, promotes atrial fibrillation, promotes dementia, macular degeneration, promotes esophageal and oral cancer, promotes liver disease and cancer. And so on balance, there is some benefits of alcohol, but there also are downsides of alcohol. And on balance, people are better if they don't drink alcohol. A good book to recommend is called The 28-Day Alcohol Challenge, about two guys in England. Wonderful guys. The British, they just drink those beers at lunchtime, right? These two guys.
Lunch. You mean breakfast.
Yeah, breakfast.
With the dippy eggs.
These two guys decide, you know what, let's stop drinking, but let's pay attention to what happens when we stop drinking. And they chronicled. And one of the things they brought out in the book, and I've observed this in my clinic.
Isn't that how funny they are? They're like, hey, let's just stop drinking today.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens.
They were probably prompted by their spouses. They were relatively young.
I'm sure.
But the point is, the one thing about health that is restored, it takes about 28 days, is sleep. Alcohol destroys sleep architecture. Even one drink does. And sleep has an architecture of REM sleep, non-REM sleep, and all these variables. When one does a sleep study, it's called a polysomnogram, and it measures all these different waves. And sleep is like going to a symphony. It's got to be everything's got to be perfect. You get a good night's sleep, the next day you feel great. Alcohol, even though it makes you feel more relaxed, make you feel like you can go to sleep better, it destroys the quality of the sleep. So people wake up and they're like, I don't feel that well rested.
Doesn't it throw off the GABA? It throws off the GABA in your brain really bad?
It probably influences a whole series of neurotransmitters, but the data are clear. It destroys sleep architecture. It takes about a month of being alcohol-free before sleep is restored. Once high-quality sleep is restored, there is a lesser surge of these stress hormones during the day because you rest so good at night. And when there's less stress hormones, then the body feels better. There's less proclivity for weight gain, and everything starts to cycle out. So I always tell my patients, listen, if you're willing to go for it, and it's usually a spousal thing. You get to a certain point. My patients are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. They're in wine clubs. They're going down to the Caymans. These commercials.
Yep.
When you see kind of the silver-haired people on the beach and the guy's wearing his white kind of beach pajamas and they're swirling the wine. You know what I'm talking about.
And he just went to 17 parties for his wife that he didn't want to go to so he could go away to the wine.
It's a big thing to ask people not to drink. It's a big thing. But I think atrial fibrillation swings it over. I think risks for dementia swing it over.
That's scary.
Now, we know this, by the way. There's a test we can order called the ApoE genotype. Now, the normal genotype is E3E3. That's normal. But the Alzheimer's gene is E4. E4 is the Alzheimer's gene. You're writing this down. I'm sure you're going to ask for this test. E4, so here's a general statistic. E3E3 is called haplotype. That's the normal configuration for mom and dad. Lifetime risk of dementia, 5%. If one gets one of the E4 genes, and the configuration is E3, E4, again, we measure it on a blood test, lifetime risk, 15%. If one gets E4 from mom and dad, they get double hit of the Alzheimer's gene, lifetime risk 65%.
65?
The single greatest factor that drives that is alcohol consumption.
Wow.
So I tell people, listen, you got an E4, lay off that alcohol because you're going to want every bit of your cognitive function later on.
That's great information.
Yeah.
Everybody should hear that. That's great information.
Very,
Nobody knows it. I
it's a
mean,
very useful test, and you only need to do it once.
why isn't that on the news?
You know, these are these advancements.
Yeah, that's great.
I am an internist and cardiologist. I am not an invasive cardiologist, so I rely on office diagnostics, ultrasound, forms of CT and MRI, but also laboratory testing. And you know, laboratory testing, blood and urine, that yields diagnoses in about 75% of all of medicine. It actually has the highest yield. When you go to see your doctor, they order blood tests. Think about this. The way we would detect kidney damage, liver damage, even the blood test for heart damage, they're all laboratory-based. How do we diagnose anemia, low thyroid, various hormonal abnormalities? Blood testing, so in vitro diagnostics in the clinical laboratory is a gold mine of information. And believe it or not, it's very cost effective. Out of all the money spent in healthcare, the best dollars are spent in the lab. You actually get your most for your dollar.
Yeah, because you figure it all out.
You said real quick, alcohol plays a role with dementia, right? Does marijuana play a role with that at all, do you think? Or is there any studies out there that show that?
I'm less familiar with the data, so I want to be fair to your audience. Now, I personally don't drink, and I don't smoke marijuana. And I told Joe Rogan I don't either when I went down to the studio. So
I just vape. I'm trying to stop vaping the nicotine.
Joe's man cave was clean that day when Dr. McCullough was there down in Austin, Texas. But I'm just less familiar with the data. Cannabinoids and marijuana, there are some natural receptors for cannabinoids. And so because of this, they've always had some medicinal value. So there are natural substances, by the way, that have medicinal values. I mean, a lot of our drugs actually come from nature. And cannabinoids, and you've heard about CBD oil, and certainly medicinal marijuana, what have you. They do have some medicinal effects, and I'm just less educated on the long-term use of marijuana in dementia. And I have to tell you, if you look at patients in my practice are typically in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Marijuana was less a part of their life than people now in their 20s and 30s and 40s, I would say. Especially with the legalization of it, right?
And I still don't understand that. I don't know how marijuana can be a federally Schedule 1, but then it's up to the states if it's legal or not. That's just really insane. Schedule 1, like heroin, Schedule 1? Federally 1 and 1, but yet the states can sell it. That blows my mind. Last thing, and then we'll get into everything else. When we were growing up, if somebody was getting a triple bypass, everybody was like, "Oh my God, Mr. Gibble, he's going to get a triple bypass." You remember it was such a big deal.
My uncle got one of those. Yeah.
Did he? And now it's like, "Oh, Jimmy's going to go get a triple bypass. All right, Jimmy, I'll see you in a week. Get back to work." Like, how did that advancement come so quick? I mean, do you remember that? Like in the 90s when I was growing up, late 80s, if you were going for any type of triple, double bypass, quadruple, whatever it was.
A chainsaw to cut you open.
Yeah, everybody was like, I remember my mom going to pray to the Mary. She went with her friend. They were going to go to Italy to pray to the statue over this bypass thing. And now you're going for a bypass? Oh, okay. See you in a week.
Well, let's just take myocardial infarction or heart attack. So someone having crushing chest pain, they're having the big one. Remember that, the characteristic, what's called Levine sign, someone holding their chest and they're gonna keel over. They're having the big one. When I was a student at Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas, Texas, there was a paper published. The inpatient mortality of someone having the big one, death, 20%. Today, with modern techniques that the whole field of interventional and clinical cardiology has developed, critical care units, all the drugs, nursing, monitoring, everything that everybody does. Current mortality rate, even for our most lethal heart attack, 2%.
Really?
20% to 2% in my practicing lifetime. Nowadays, someone can be having a heart attack. Doctors can go in through the wrist, through the radial artery. The skill of these interventional cardiologists is mind-blowing. They go up through the radial artery with tiny catheters. They get to the critical area, open up the blockage, put in a stent, and say, we're done. And a Band-Aid, and you can just drink a Starbucks and read the paper and say, listen, I just had a major heart attack 2 hours ago, and I can be on a WebEx.
I want that in my portfolio one day.
It is. I mean, I want the audience
Wow,
to
that
understand.
is really
That is astounding.
amazing.
And the standard of care in our country and worldwide for the treatment of heart attacks is amazing. And so because of this, and because bypass surgery has gotten so good, now bypass surgery with minimal techniques, now bypass surgeries themselves have gone down. When we hit our peak, we were nearly at 1 million bypass surgeries per year.
Wow.
At our peak in the 1990s. The current number...
That's when we used to hear about it. That's when I was growing up.
The current that was in Texas when they were drinking buttermilk, and I remember that. But the current number of bypass surgeries now in the United States, under 250,000.
Wow.
Because we've gotten so much better with these other techniques, so the stenting and the catheter techniques. The point I'm going to make, though, and this is a backdrop for our discussion, for coronary heart disease, heart attacks, we have largely solved this problem. You don't hear about executives keeling over of the heart attack in the boardroom anymore. Remember the CEO of McDonald's who keels over and dies? You used to hear about so-and-so died after complications of cardiac surgery. No, the rates of mortality are far less than 1% now. This is one of the most scrutinized statistics in all of medicine. Cardiac anesthesia is really advanced. The surgeons are excellent. They can use various minimally invasive techniques. The nurses are excellent. They use cell saver devices where there's auto transfusion. The perfusion machines are excellent. So patients get through bypass surgery. Fewer people need them. The drugs really work, like lowering cholesterol, lowering blood pressure, controlling blood sugar. That heart patients now, cardiology is a stable illness. We manage this in the office. These pacemakers and defibrillators are wonderful. We talked about ventricular tachycardia. Do you know when a patient has ventricular tachycardia and one of these devices are in, the devices say, okay, you're in VT and we don't need to shock. I'm just going to get ahead of the VT and train the rhythm with a pacemaking rhythm that's just a little bit ahead of the VT, and I'll pace you out of VT. The device figures it out. And so patients can be nearly having a fatal rhythm, and they feel, oh, I just had an adjustment. I'm fine. So these defibrillators, their safety track record, and Medtronic makes them, and all the major device manufacturers that you know about make them. They are amazing advancements. The computer technology and the electrical technology is fantastic. We have to change a battery once every 10 years. But because of all these advancements, we don't have people keeling over in the airport. We're not doing CPR on people. You go to professional football games where we don't have three codes going on in the end zone or out in the behind the upper deck or what have you. Things are reasonable. Now, 20 or 30 years ago, there used to be all kinds of stuff going on. This is a backdrop for what we're going to talk about now with the current pandemic.
Absolutely. And this is a peanut question to a guy like you, but what are the real signs of a heart attack?
Yeah,
like if I'm having a heart attack, what are the real signs?
Heart attack, where you have
everybody wants to really know.
Where you have a cholesterol blockage in your arteries because you don't want to take statins, and you didn't take statins, so now you have a cholesterol blockage, and you're having a heart attack, is you have crushing substernal chest pain. It feels like pressure. An elephant sitting on your your chest. It radiates to the neck. It radiates to the left arm.
It is the left arm.
Sweatiness, turning ashen gray, a feeling of impending doom, like I'm going to die.
And you turn ash gray.
And you turn ash gray, and then you look to your friend and say, call 911. I'm having a heart attack.
Is it possible to not know you're having a heart attack? Can you have a heart attack without possibly knowing? Is it a possibility, I guess?
Yes. About 25% of heart attacks are silent. Now, the prototype for a silent heart attack is an advanced diabetic. And the diabetes, in a sense, kind of fries the sensory nerves to the heart. And a diabetic would just, I couldn't tell if I was having a low blood sugar, I was a bit sweaty, and then we do a checkup in the office. Oh, my gosh, you had a heart attack. So there is a rate of missed heart attacks. But by and large, people like us in this room, when we're going to have a fatal heart attack, we get enough of a warning. We call 911. The paramedics pick us up, and you go to the local hospital. The cardiology team is already coming in. They get up through the groin or the wrist within a matter of minutes and get the artery open. The standard of care, and I give a lot of credit to William O'Neill, my mentor up in Michigan, William Beaumont Hospital, his lead interventional cardiologist, Dr. Cindy Grines, incredible practitioners, Joe Kahn, Steve Almany, leaders around the world. There was a South American leader, Antonio Colombo, fantastic people who are just pioneers. These doctors worked day and night because they were dedicated and said, we can do this better than the drugs. Now, the drug people, it was one of the biggest drug centers for this. The drug people say, no, we're not going to use catheters. We can sit back and give the drugs. Cleveland Clinic. Eric Topol, who's currently at Scripps now, he had a deal where he was getting stock certificates from Genentech. He ultimately lost his job over this because they were giving the blood thinners.
And it got published right in the journal.
Thrombolytics. And so, believe it or not, there was Harvard, Duke, all the academia, they were with big pharma, and they didn't like our disruptive forces. And there's William Beaumont Hospital, Moses Cone, and Riverside Hospital, El Camino. We were a bunch of ragtag community hospitals, and we said we could do it better with catheters. And the drug guys in Genentech said, oh, don't you dare. And I remember this mega battle that went on, and we prevailed because it turns out that this, in a sense, this modification of a surgical technique was so much better than the drugs. The blood-thinning drugs, the thrombolytics, what the risk was? Stroke.
Yeah.
So actually one could bleed into the brain.
Yeah, so some great drugs. So now 2020 comes. You're a big cardiologist, and COVID hits, March, I believe, right? And you look at it and you start to decide that you want to fix it, like any other doctor would, right?
I looked at this.
I'm putting it in simple terms, definitely not good doctor terms.
It's in my book. It's in my book, Courage to Face COVID-19. People have said, Dr. McCullough, why was it you? And I said, listen, there's no checkbox on the application to college or medical school or residency for courage. I don't consider myself a courageous person. Now, you have to check a box, I'm sure, to be a firefighter or to be a police officer or to be a Navy SEAL. You have to have guts, right? Don't you have to have guts? You don't have to have guts to be a doctor. I just go into the office every day, go in the hospital. I never considered myself courageous. But when things started to happen, let me tell you what we didn't see. We didn't see a single medical center in the United States say, listen, we have a clinic. We're going to open up a clinic, and everybody getting sick with COVID, come to our clinic. We'll get you some drugs. We'll get the tests. We'll take care of you at home. Nobody said that. Nobody said that. No chairman of medicine, no chairman of infectious disease. People started getting sick. They said, what do we do? People were going into urgent cares. They would wait in line for a COVID test. They'd say, you have COVID. They'd say, well, what do I do now? Well, we don't know. Go home. They go to the ER. Well, I've got COVID. What do I do? We don't know. Why don't you go home? So this giant void developed, and it developed quickly. And I never forget, I was on some of these system-wide conference calls, and we were always talking about masks and personal protective equipment and reverse ventilation rooms and what we're going to do. How many ventilators? Remember all this? We got to have ventilators. Yeah. So wait a minute, ventilators.
They were shipping a pile of them to New York and a pile here.
Ventilators are not solving the problem.
They were killing people.
Ventilators were not solving the problem. And at one of these conference calls in March, I said, listen, guys, are we going to start treating this? Are we going to treat the problem? And it was just silence. It was like, who's going to do this? Who's going to face COVID, right? Who's going to get a big cough or sneeze in their face? I think it was fear. Doctors were really, really quick to close down their clinics. We closed down catheterization laboratories. We closed down operating rooms. Doctors were like, whoa, we can sit back and just kind of ride this one out. And remember that, if we could just get to Easter, we just get through 90 days of this, or maybe just get to this.
I remember the
Easter thing. We'll ride it out.
Yeah.
And people got sicker and got sicker and got sicker. And I said, I can't watch this. I literally on one of these calls, and as it was spreading through the nursing homes, and I was sensitized to this because my dad was in a nursing home, I said, this virus is going to slaughter our parents. It's going to slaughter our grandparents. It's going to slaughter people in the nursing homes unless we do something.
And the VA, too.
And the VA. Yeah. All these people in Florida. Look where we are. We're in Florida. Florida's, we call it God's waiting room down here.
Yeah, that's what I called it when I moved there.
I'm telling you, it's going to slaughter our seniors.
I go, do I want to go to God's waiting room, or do I want to go pay 25 gazillion% in taxes in California? It was one of the two.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't think of Texas.
Yeah.
So no, I went to God's waiting room.
I tell you, Florida has so many people with New York and Pennsylvania and New Jersey accents. It drives me, especially Boca. But when I felt so compelled, I said, I have to do something. These guys, nobody's getting off the dime. There wasn't a single signal that we were going to get off the dime. You think the government would say, listen, we got some treatment kits, or here's a big randomized trial. We're going to do a 20 to 40,000 patient trial. We don't know, but we're going to try some drugs in combination for our seniors in nursing homes. The U.S. government put together 0 nursing home programs, nothing. The major medical centers offered no outpatient treatment protocols. And the first thing that rolled out from the government, which was pretty late in 2020, said, listen, don't treat the illness. Let people get sick intentionally. Let them get really sick. Come into the hospital. Still don't treat them until they need oxygen. And at that point in time, then start your treatment.
What sense does that make?
I can tell you, would we ever do that for a bladder infection and let it go all the way to the kidneys? Would we ever let that happen for a skin infection and let it become an abscess? Would we ever let that happen for a different type of pneumonia?
No.
If it was pneumococcal pneumonia, wouldn't we treat it when it's a bronchitis so it doesn't become a pneumonia? So the conceptualization of the disease became really, really important. And I was fortunate. I had previously, with my heart and kidney work, I had a ton of collaboration in Italy. And Italy was getting slammed. Remember, it was Wuhan, and then it was Milan. I had a lot of friends there. And the conceptualization is on slide 131, if you can bring it up. Yep. And importantly, I get to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go through once he has it up.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, maybe if you can bring it up, maybe it'll be quicker than me learning this mouse pad. But just bring up slide 131. So the conceptualization we had down pretty early, and what we had learned is that this virus, 131,
only up to 99 on here.
Are you in the PDF?
Yep.
Is that all that was produced?
Yep.
Oh, bummer. Okay, maybe your camera can just pick this up. So much for the tech. Why don't you just get rid of the PDF?
Yeah.
The conceptualization, though, is this. The virus is really replicating in the nose and starting to invade the body, and then it burns out over the course of about 3 weeks. This is with the earlier versions of the virus. But it kicks off a bunch of inflammatory factors called cytokine injury, cytokines or inflammation. And then that triggers blood clotting. And the key observation was blood clotting. And with the older versions of the virus, the Wuhan wild type and alpha, beta, gamma, the mortality started to pick up at about 2 weeks. So believe it or not, it was a long illness. People were dying. They were dying 4 weeks into it, 6 weeks into it. And so this conceptualization was really, really important. Our government, in all the press conferences they had, every single guideline they had, they actually never conceptualized it this way. They didn't have the right concept. So what the government was saying in the first set of guidelines is wait till people come here and they come in the hospital and let's give them remdesivir.
Yeah, I see it.
Well, remdesivir is not, there's virtually no virus here at this stage. Remdesivir is not going to work. No, we by the time they come in, if they're that sick, they need steroids and other drugs here, and they need blood thinners. And the Italians did the very first set of autopsies of people who died, and the lungs were full of blood clots. And so that was the critical observation. So as an internist and a doctor, I threw myself into this. I said, I have to do everything I can. I've got to come up with something. And talking to many other people, I said, a single drug's not going to work. Anybody who says that this fatal disease that we have a magic pill and a single drug or a magic IV. Oh, it's going to be remdesivir, and that's going to save the world. No way. No way. I wouldn't have bought that for a second. Or how about Paxlovid? A single drug is going to save.
Oh, is that the one that
no way.
What's her name got? And somehow she got it for like $3,000 a pill. And
no, what I'm saying is a single drugs and we don't even treat a staph infection with a single drug. I mean, we don't even treat shingles with a single drug. So this idea that for this brutal fatal illness that there's going to be a single magic pill, forget it. It's a complicated illness. From the very beginning, I said, listen, pour on the drugs. We need drugs to shut down the virus early. We need drugs to handle the inflammation, and steroids became a key finding there, and we need blood thinners. Everything from at least aspirin and sometimes more blood thinners. So this became what's called multi-drug therapy for COVID-19. And at the top, we put intracellular anti-infectives, antiviral antibodies, which came along, corticosteroids, immunomodulators, antiplatelet, anticoagulant agents. To this day, the only people who get put in the hospital with COVID are people who don't get treatment. People being hospitalized is a manifestation of no treatment. There is a survey done by Verdkirk and colleagues that asks a question, did you get COVID? 18,000 people. Yes or no? Yeah, we got COVID. Did you end up in the hospital? Yeah. Did your doctor give you any treatment ahead of time? No. That's the answer. If you got COVID and you were high risk and you stayed out of the hospitals, well, yeah, I got some medicine. The exact types of medicine were less important than actually getting some medicine. Everyone's wanted to be hyper-focused on remdesivir in the hospital or hyper-focused on hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, Paxlovid, or molnupiravir. That hyper-focus was ridiculous. People were focusing on the virus. It's probably far more important if they got steroids, aspirin, other forms of anti-inflammatories or blood thinners like heparins. And so what I've always said is that, listen, no single drug is necessary nor sufficient, that it's drugs in combination, typically about 4 to 6 drugs in combination. And the main thing is to start early. And I subsequently published with a group in Italy, a paper by Fazio and colleagues. We found the golden window for treatment was in the first 3 days, that you just can't let it brew. Now, the hard thing is someone say, listen, it's very mild. I got a mild case.
Well, what's a mild case?
Well,
what's a non-mild
I just
case?
have a fever and I got a stuffy nose. And let's say you're 85 years old and you're in independent living. I've got a mild case. It's like, no, grandmother, that is going to be a severe case on the ventilator in a month. So let's start now. When you feel good, let's start with these drugs in combination. And what?
Oh yeah, can you pull up Dr. McCullough's website?
Yeah, it's on there.
Yeah, this is an awesome chart.
So this became what's called McCullough Protocol. It's now copyrighted.
Can you believe it?
And
I can believe that you put that together.
There you go.
Come on.
But it evolved over time, and there's many
Scroll
contributors.
up.
Scroll up. You'll see it. Yeah,
yep.
just
click on that.
See if you can make it bigger.
Yep. There we go.
And so this became what's called sequence multi-drug therapy. And at the top is very important. There are things to do. As soon as somebody gets COVID, and this is with the older, more severe versions, we stay at home, right? Okay, that's the one time. You only need to lock down if you have COVID. If you don't have the illness, you don't lock down. That was the first point. The second point is, look what's up there. Povidone iodine or peroxide oral nasal washes. So the virus is in the nose. It's replicating. The snot is coming out. It's filled with virus.
My doctor gave me that stuff with a little bit of metal stuff in it to shoot up it.
Yeah.
That was the right stuff.
You can listen.
But you know what? I thought you were supposed to go like this. I had a sore throat for 2 days.
I remember that.
Shut up, Rob.
If it burns, it's too strong. But it turns out virtually anything kills the virus. So on our platform, I have a podcast, McCullough Report, on America Loud Talk Radio. We brought on Nate Jones, who's one of the most interesting people in the world. He's CEO
We'll have your podcast in the description, of course.
He's a great guy. Nate is a pilot and a deep sea diver and a CEO of a company. And his company is called Clear, Xlear. But Nate gave a review on our platform of all the different things that have been tried up in the nose. It's very interesting. That actually kill bugs. Do you know dilute Baby shampoo works. Dilute iodine works. Dilute hydrogen peroxide.
Baby shampoo?
Yeah, xylitol. Because babies, think about babies.
Right,
Babies get stuff in their eyes, their nose, and it has to be safe, right? So baby shampoo. It turns out colloidal silver. There's a whole variety of things. Ozone
That's
works.
what was
colloidal silver works. So we start something in the nose to start killing the virus. This is very important. And for prevention, we can do it about twice a day. Now, I'm traveling. If I felt a little viral on the plane, I've got some of the little iodine. I'd pop it. I'd do a couple squirts, sniff it out, sniff it up, spit it. It's got to go around, spit it out, and I'd kill whatever's up there. But these washes are so important. And then gargling. Remember, when you have a sore throat and you're having a cold, whether it's COVID or another cold, the pain is because the virus is there. You can gargle with a dilute iodine solution, or as long as you don't swallow it, but scopolamine Listerine work fine. So if you actually just gargle, and you know it because it hurts, right?
Right. You know it's burning, so
but
it's
the
doing
key
something.
thing is gargle and make it a 30-second gargle and actually have it go where it hurts. You got to zap it. It works, and you have to do it pretty frequently. So we're talking, 4 to 6 times a day when you're sick. But doing the local treatment is so critical, and we learned this pretty late. This was the way to reduce spread of the virus. So the Chinese were publishing, it was published also in the United States, that 85% of the spread of COVID occurred in the home. People weren't getting it from going out to places like this, and they were getting it from the home.
But then they tell you to stay home.
Because a sick person gives it to a susceptible person. And why do they give it? Because there's so much snot and so much coughing and aerosolization. The way to cut this down, to cut down the spread, was the nasal virucidal washes. And I can tell you this became, this is my kitchen countertop here, showing the povidone iodine, just a few drops, maybe half a teaspoon in a little spray bottle, pinch of salt. You can use the bulb syringe. My wife tried that one time. She squirted too much up, and she burned. She said she told me to get that off of there. But just a very
get that off there.
very mild. The iodine is kind of thick brown. It needs to be at least to look like tea. But this paper, now this is a prospective, randomized, controlled trial. This is the highest quality science. Was it done by the National Institutes of Health? Was it done by Harvard? How about Duke? How about Mayo Clinic? No, it's done in Bangladesh. It's done in Bangladesh.
I read Rashid, I can't say his last name, MD.
But listen to this. Randomized trial. This is the highest quality science we have. Highest quality science. Look at the results. Everybody here's got COVID. This is early on, 303 in each group. And there's the PCR. They're all positive. Look by day 3, those who are blasting the virus in the nose, you have about a 90% reduction in PCR positivity. If you want to reduce spread of the virus, you have to do this in the nose. It's not hand sanitizer. It's not wearing a mask. It's not taking a vaccine. It's actually doing virucidal nasal treatment. It's so important. And so this would have reduced spread of the virus. This is the way. And so what I've learned, I learned this late, but even for the common cold, when I used to get a cold, I got to tell you, there's probably a 90% chance my wife would get a cold. No matter what we did, she'd get it. Now when we get sick, we do this right away.
Gone.
The other person doesn't get sick.
Unbelievable.
My wife was around her 98-year-old father, her 89-year-old mother. My wife's got a cold. I said, oh my gosh, that's it. They're cooked because we're full-time caretakers, right? And they didn't get sick. It was amazing. And then look at the outcomes in this clinical trial. Marked reduction in need for oxygen or hospitalization just with the local treatment. Yeah,
right there, right?
Yeah, put that in show mode if you can. See if you can put it in show mode, or I don't know if it's possible. But the point I want to make, if you go one slide forward now, is look at Nancy Mace. So this isn't just me as a doctor. There's 12 clinical studies now. Look at early treatment, 71% improvement. Late treatment, 44% improvement. Prophylaxis, 45%. That's pretty solid. Look what Nancy Mace says. She says she wants to know why the feds have not promoted nasal spray treatments for COVID-19. Why did our government not tell us this? Why did the urgent care centers not have protocols? Where was the Mayo Clinic protocol? Where was the Harvard protocol? This was so big. In our book, we added a chapter. John Leake is the main author. He interviewed Nate Jones. He said, Nate, what's going on? Nate said, do you know what? when we were making advancements on this, the FDA and the Federal Trade Commission crushed all these companies. They tangled up every single company in a lawsuit and said, don't you dare try to treat COVID with these nasal sprays.
For big pharma money or for what? I mean,
We're
political power?
We're just reporting the news.
Just the news.
But
yeah.
Nate and the leaders for Cofix RX, the leaders for colloidal silver and ozone, they were all hit. They said, whatever you do, don't you dare treat COVID with a nasal spray. What's the harm? What's the harm in doing this? The data, in my clinical practice now, I've been doing this well over a year. It helps. Is it a cure? No. But does it take the edge off the virus? Yes. Does it make it less communicable? For sure. The data suggests this. The fact that governments have not featured simple, helpful, reasonable things should make everybody suspicious. Let's go back to the protocol quickly and just go over another simple thing. Is
70?
So look here. I said, open the windows, get fresh air, ventilate. The last thing you want to do is have somebody in a New York high-rise where you can't open the windows and the virus is just, loading. So Wuhan, very vertical city. Milan, vertical city. New York. Get outside. That's the reason why the rural areas, I mean, you'd want to be fresh air all the time if you could. I tell people, they say, I have COVID. I can't go outside. I said, front porch or back porch. You don't need to hang around people. Don't go out kissing people. Just get fresh air. Then look at this next skinny bar, the over-the-counter bundle. These are reasonable things that people can have at home. None of these are curative, but you can find supportive studies for each one of these. Zinc, 50 milligrams a day. It helps inhibit the polymerase of the virus. It's slightly antiviral. Vitamin D, we actually upgraded. For 5 days, we go to 20,000 international units a day. A standard baseline level is 5,000.
You know what's funny about that? 3,000 million different people. Like, just asking me, or I've heard people ask, which vitamin D do I get?
The standard would be 5,000 international units a day. That's what I take at baseline.
But you know, like there's like D3, D plus, blah,
D3.
blah, blah.
Get D3. But we upgraded to 20,000 a day for 5 days. Every study that comes out seems to point to some beneficial effect. There's even a meta-analysis showing that if we achieve a vitamin D level between 50 and 100, there's almost a 0% chance of being hospitalized with COVID. Now, is vitamin D a cure by itself? No. But does it play a role in McCullough protocol? For sure. There's no downside to it.
Doctor, I was just saying, at this time, they had made it so confusing in the media. They would just say, take vitamin D. Then you go to Whole Foods, and there's 17 different vitamin Ds, so then nobody knew what to get.
Right.
They kind of like shut it down is what I was trying to say.
But that's the reason why I was clear. Now, vitamin C, it's higher dose, 3,000 milligrams a day. There are studies and protocols where intravenous has been used, even up to 25 grams, but here 3 grams or 3,000 milligrams. Quercetin, which is a polyphenol supplement, it has some anti-spike protein capabilities, 500 twice a day. Famotidine, this is important. This is over-the-counter Pepcid. Pepcid is an antacid antihistamine. Its usual dose is 20 milligrams a day, but the innovation is to use 80 milligrams a day because it has an antiviral effect. And in a large study by Miro and colleagues from the University of Virginia, 20,000 patients, of those who took famotidine and aspirin's in the protocol, they had about a 45% reduction in being hospitalized. So all of these are simple things.
Over-the-counter.
We're not even to the prescription drugs yet. So if people had an over-the-counter supplement, do you know that I was called like this? I'm pretty good. You guys called me. I got on a plane and I got here, right?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
I got called by the extended family of Martin Luther King. Come to Atlanta. I did the same thing. I dropped what I was doing and came to Atlanta. I met them. We went into a studio like this and I started to explain this. And, African Americans have been ravaged by this illness. Ravaged. They have double the mortality of Caucasians. Double. It's been awful. And she said, Dr. McCullough, are you mean to tell me that something simple like this, these simple over-the-counter things, could have helped these poor black people at home? And the government said nothing. The government didn't even put together a helpful FAQ.
As a human being, that's got to break your heart.
It's just heartbreaking. And the government stance is, well, if you don't do this unless it's in a clinical research protocol. I said, fine, I love research. I do research. Provide a 1-800 number so we can all get in research protocols. Nothing from the government.
I was going to say, we'll be waiting until the year 30 gazillion.
when I testified in the Texas Senate in March of 2021, I said, where's the 1-800 number in Texas? People say, well, you have to go to clinicaltrials.gov and you can navigate it there. If you go in there and you click and you go into all these complicated, tables, you can maybe find something that's available in your area. I said, grandma's in independent living. Do you think she's going to get on clinicaltrials.gov and she's going to navigate and somehow find a COVID protocol? No, we have to do better than that. The point I'm making is our pandemic response from the National Institutes of Health was pitiful. When I mean pitiful, that's pitiful with a capital P. And I tell you, if I was running operations in the United States, this problem would have been over with a year ago. Because I would have kicked butt. I would have had all the research oriented towards community research. We would have gotten the vulnerable people into research protocols. We would have quickly got into multi-drug protocols. We would have provided base nutritional and supplement support. We wouldn't have been opaque about using virucidal nasal washes. We would have had every nursing home would have been stocked. There would have been protocols. People would have been using iodine or dilute peroxide. People who are mentally incapacitated, we can actually nebulize it and do perfectly well with that. These poor people who with mental retardation, cerebral palsy. There were a few children who died of COVID. And when you look at this, the majority had cystic fibrosis, so they were on ventilators. Right. They had congenital problems. They were bedbound. There were some deaths. There were small numbers. Not healthy kids going to school, but you were talking about really special needs kids. They didn't get any treatment. I looked at all the papers. My heart broke. They didn't even get anything. I never forget, I was called one night by a desperate father in Canada. And somehow he got a hold of me, and I was driving from Tyler back to Dallas. It was a dark night. I was on a country road. He goes, I'm desperate. He goes, my child's got COVID. My 2-year-old child's COVID, and the child's really having trouble breathing. And I've been in the ER about 3 times, and they give a nebulizer, and nothing happens. I said, what are they using? He said, they're using albuterol. I said, well, that's the standard. That's the standard nebulizer we use for aspirin. What we need to use, because of the inflammation, is a steroid. Oh. And on the protocol, you see down there in green, inhaled budesonide. And Richard Bartlett, who's an ER doctor in West Texas, wonderful man, was on all the TV shows in America early on because he had observed that if you have younger people, even older people, and you use inhaled budesonide, nebulized, it really turns it around. So I told this father, I said, you go back and you demand budesonide. The poor guy, it's midnight. He drives back and he demands budesonide, and like magic, the child gets better. And there are 3 randomized trials of budesonide, massive impact, reducing the risk of going to the ER, being hospitalized. Budesonide, an inhaled steroid inhaler. We have a whole panoply of drugs. I won't go through them. They work in combination.
But something like prednisone you have up there, that's been around. That was around when my grandma was alive. My great-grandma was alive.
Steroids in the treatment of COVID, and we have dedicated chapters to our books on this, played a role. Do you know early on it was controversial to use steroids? Yeah. I'll never forget, I was on a conference call. We were planning clinical trials. So I had already had an investigation of a drug application with the FDA with hydroxychloroquine. I was the lead for the Remachban program, was an innovative Japanese product we wanted to test in the United States.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. What was the final outcome with the hydroxychloroquine? I can never say it right.
Hydroxychloroquine ultimately was studied in about 300 studies. 300 studies. And the general conclusions are it had a modest effect, about a 25% treatment effect. Joe Ladapo, who's a current Surgeon General of Florida, and I published that analysis, about a 25% benefit, particularly when started early. But it was kind of slow to work and start early. But it wasn't zero. It wasn't zero. So hydroxy still could have helped people early. There was a big surge in use in the first year of the pandemic. And what we had learned is there was even a more dynamic drug in the second year we learned about, which was ivermectin. But getting back to the steroids, there was a controversy. I'll never forget, I was on a conference call with an infectious disease doctor. And I said, I have a young guy, he's a paramedic, he's pretty sick with COVID. We're scrambling to go. And I've prescribed some drugs for him, and I prescribed prednisone. And this infectious disease doctor said, well, I definitely wouldn't do that. It was interesting how doctors early on in the pandemic, particularly experts, infectious disease doctors, they knew what not to do. Like, how did they know they wouldn't do that? Do you know there's doctors from the very beginning? Oh, I definitely wouldn't use hydroxychloroquine. Nope, wouldn't use that. It's not safe. Wait a minute. We've been using it for 65 years. Why is it suddenly not safe? And why wouldn't you give it a try? There were doctors from the very beginning who said, I definitely wouldn't use ivermectin. I wouldn't use it. From the very beginning, how did they know not to use it? Here's an interesting observation. Hydroxychloroquine, widely available over the counter because it's an anti-malarial. It's over the counter in France. There's a lot of Africans, French Africans. There's a lot of traffic back and forth. About 6 months before COVID hits, they take hydroxychloroquine. They make a prescription in France. They actually restrict it. How did they know? Early in April, in Queensland, Australia, they write legislation. If a doctor uses hydroxychloroquine to treat a COVID patient, that doctor will go to jail.
To jail?
Yeah. When I told Tucker Carlson that,
Wow.
I told Tucker Carlson, he said, wait a minute. He goes, the research wasn't done then. He goes, how did they know?
How did they know?
How did they know? Do you know through court order, all these community rules of social media have come out? And we saw the community rules of YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
YouTube said, we are going to censor anything with hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin in it.
And they did.
Early. How did they know? Why would they censor it? These are just commonly available drugs. We dedicate chapters to it in our book. Interesting, both hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin
have been around forever. And they're generic.
And they're derived from natural products. The hydroxychloroquine comes from the chinchoa tree. Ivermectin is actually found in the dirt in Japan, and they're natural products. We know how to use them. They have multiple uses, multiple modes of action. They've actually, believe it or not, hydroxychloroquine is so safe, it's been tested and used in pregnant women. We never test and use drugs in pregnant women. It's perfectly safe. A woman with lupus erythematosus, we would use hydroxychloroquine. So hydroxychloroquine played a role early on. So in the book, my dad gets COVID. He's in a rehab facility in Texas. I had brought him there from Alabama. He had dementia, a pelvic fracture. A guy couldn't get up. And the nurse, somebody gives him COVID. And I told my wife, I said, that's it. Dad came and sit up. That's it. And so what I said is that, am I going to follow the damn government protocol and let the virus slaughter my dad? Or am I going to step up and do something? And if I am going to do something for my dad, I sure as hell am going to do it for my other patients, and I'm going to do it for the rest of the world if I can.
Well, you did it.
And what we did not see among my colleagues, and we did not see among doctors at large, and we did not see in any of our government doctors and officials, is an ounce of compassion. An ounce of compassion. They simply didn't care. The numbers racked up, and it became a slaughterhouse in America for people who didn't get treatment. My dad, because it was early on, he got hydroxychloroquine, he got the aspirin, he got the zinc and the other things mentioned. We didn't know about the steroids then. I think steroids could have had him get over it sooner. He was sick for a month, but he did get the blood thinners. I knew that. And we got the windows open, which they never do in nursing homes. We open up the windows. Dad was cold. I said, listen, run the heat, but just get the air flowing. And fortunately, they worked with me. But all the principles of the McCullough protocol worked to my dad. What really drove me nuts is the fact that we saw these deaths racking up, and they were in our most vulnerable senior citizens. what was happening is people were getting sick with COVID. They were being offered no treatment whatsoever. The government says do not treat them. The doctor says, well, we can't treat them. The government says we can't treat them. They were going into the hospital. They were getting remdesivir when it was too late for it to work. Remdesivir has some toxicities. They were put into isolation. And I can tell you, when you have a senior citizen in isolation, your chances of using FaceTime successfully. I think with my dad, we tried one time, and poor dad hit the wrong button, and it was gone. I saw his face one time. These senior citizens, and we had now about 1 million of them, died alone. They never saw their family again. They never said goodbye. They were slaughtered. They were slaughtered, and they weren't given a chance. And I think everybody should read the book because it tells a very important point of history. What happened, and I'm convinced of it now, is this was the U.S. government and governments all over the world, and it was intentional. They suppressed and denied treatment in order to promote fear, to promote suffering, to promote more hospitalizations, and to promote death. For the first time, our governments worked together to promote death.
And take away guys like me or somebody else's, their grandpa, their grandmother that doesn't have a doctor like you around that can go make a quick move, that lost their great-grandma, the one that they looked up to and couldn't wait to go to on Sundays. And
the analysis have come down, in the United States, has come down to roughly 90-10. 10% truly died of COVID-19 and COVID pneumonia. They died of the illness. 90% had other factors that were contributing, right? They had heart failure, they had renal disease, and there were other contributors, but the COVID may have tipped them over at the end. The COVID may have foreshortened whatever time they had left. But it was clear COVID death was an elderly problem. It wasn't a problem of 6-month-old. But this suppression of early treatment and all the things that happened, and then the struggle. So it was me in Dallas and Livette Lozano, but it was also Harvey Risch at Yale played a role, and then Pierre Corey in Wisconsin, and Paul Merrick in Virginia, George Fareed and Brian Tyson in South Central California, Didier Rialt and Matthew Millian in Marseille, France. We started saying, listen, we can treat this. Eugenia Barrentios in El Salvador, Dr. Sankaran Chetty in South Africa, we all agreed we can treat it. Why wouldn't our government say, go for it?
It's working here.
Just go for it. It doesn't even matter if it works or not. If they say, doctors, try it. Do anything you can, but keep our senior citizens out of the hospital and try to ease them through the illness. In the McCullough report, I've interviewed some doctors in Asia, East Asia, and Thailand. And I said, what do you guys do over there? They said, well, we use a variety of poultices, and we use inhaled herbs and other natural substances. And I said, well, does it work? They said, well, it's pretty much what we did in the Spanish flu. It's not much different. He said, the bottom line is, if you can reduce the intensity and the duration of symptoms, you can get people through the illness. But if you don't treat them at all, the anxiety of the difficulty breathing and the fever becomes so great that this becomes a vicious cycle that ultimately leads to death. And they said, you must relieve symptoms. And so the U.S. government approach of not providing any relief of symptoms drove our seniors into a panic. And I think historians will record this, that myself and a few doctors tried. So Senator Ron Johnson was following all this and started to communicate with people. Peter Navarro was calling. Peter Navarro called me in my clinic one day. My phone rings.
Really?
It's the White House. I was like, okay, the White House wants to talk to me. and I said, listen, can you treat this? I said, yes, it's not perfect. None of these drugs are perfect, but we can do something. Something's better than nothing, isn't it? Ron Johnson felt so strongly about this, he invited Pierre Corey because, again, it was controversial whether to use steroids. So in May of 2020, he calls Pierre Corey in and says, I want Senate testimony. The whole Senate's closed down. He goes, but I want to get this on the record. Can you use steroids? Corey, a wonderful doctor, critical care pulmonologist, lays it out there and says, yes, steroids have an effect and this is what we should use. Turns out that probably a little higher dose than what became the convention. The British tried dexamethasone 6 milligrams, which we never use in clinical practice. Never. Dexamethasone is used at 10 milligrams about every 4 hours for the brain because it gets into the brain. But standard for asthma and allergic pneumonitis and poison ivy, we use prednisone. Prednisone's the drug to use. Corey agreed, prednisone, and then the hospital saw Imedrol. So that was May. Things start to get more intense. More Americans are being hospitalized. McCullough protocol is born. Corey and Merrick come up with FLCC protocol. They're similar. Rialt comes up with the French protocol. Chetty, the South African. Brentios. So I get mine into press. I publish it in the American Journal of Medicine in August of 2020. I work with the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, independent group, and we get a home treatment guide by October of 2020. This is what's going on. So within 6 months of this thing hitting, we actually have a treatment approach for the country. I mean, I'm going to look back on this. It takes a while to publish. It takes a while to get through the peer review process. And we found that there was tremendous headwinds in the medical literature. These papers weren't welcome. When I published the paper in the American Journal of Medicine, the letters to the editor poured in.
Really?
Yeah, I published a paper saying, listen, we can treat COVID. Here's the rationale for this. Got a letter from Duke. Got a letter from McGill, from Monash in Australia, from Brazil. And the letter was something like this. Dr. McCullough, you can't treat COVID at home. I said, really? I said, why don't you overcome your fear
and try it
and join me and start treating patients and let's finish this thing. The letters were basically saying, listen, Dr. McCullough, don't make us look bad. Don't make us look bad. So much of the tension we have right now in medicine is, you know what? Me and Corey and Merrick and Yvette Lozano and Rialt, we made these guys look bad. And when I went on Tucker Carlson, I said, Tucker, where's the Harvard protocol? Where's the Mayo protocol? Where's the bravado? You know, all these institutions, oh, we're the best at heart disease. We're the best at cancer. Come to us. You have all these wonderful advancements in American medicine. Do you know, as we sit here today, not a single hospital has an outpatient treatment clinic or an outpatient treatment protocol?
I believe it. Didn't Hartford not want to deal with it? They didn't want to take any patients, or Johns Hopkins, one of the major hospitals. They would not take any, they want nothing to do with it.
A lot of them deflected. And to make matters worse, you could say, listen, we're a hospital. This is not our bailiwick. This is outpatient. What about inpatient care? Where's the Harvard protocol for inpatient care? What about Mayo? What about Emory?
They ran from it, right?
What? There was a bare-bones government protocol that says do nothing, and here, give some remdesivir pretty late, and then dexamethasone. Protocols are okay. They can be a baseline, but they need to be built upon. This was a complicated illness. There was no effort to share comparative best practices. There was no effort to share comparative statistics. To this day, we still don't know which hospital has the lowest COVID mortality because no one's shown an interest. Do you know there was one hospital in Houston, United Memorial Hospital, and there's a Hispanic physician there, Joseph Varone, and he's kind of king of the hospital. He said, screw this. He goes, I'm using multiple drug protocol. I'm going to do what I think is right, and I'm featuring ivermectin. And he did it. And he saved patients like nobody else. And people were airlifting patients into Varone. We had one doctor and one hospital that wanted to be great at COVID. And the rest of American hospitals absolutely tanked on COVID. To this day, there were some early reports. By the time people went on ventilators, 90% were dying, 100% were dying. There's a recent paper in JAMA by Graspa and colleagues, 3 different epochs of COVID. Even the most modern epoch, mortality on a ventilator for somebody fully vaccinated, 62%. Someone unvaccinated, 66%. Clinically insignificant. But the point is, the ventilator doesn't save the majority of patients. The ventilator's too late. We need to use lots of drugs so people don't end up on the ventilator.
How do you, I guess, hearing all, my mind's
yeah,
blown.
my mind's blown too.
But like
It takes you a minute to sink that in.
I look back and I always use my dad for examples. Tommy knows he's 82 years old, and again, no disrespect here, he's always just like, I don't trust doctors. I'll never go to a doctor. If I break my arm, that's the only way they'll see me. You get all these differing opinions of this drug and that drug and the stuff that you're telling me, and we're seeing this stuff in there. How does the public, Joe Blow, some guy in Boondock Nowhere, say, how do I know what to trust? How do I know if the stuff you're telling me is bogus, or this guy or that guy? Like, how does one, just general Joe, say, man, you know?
The tried and true sources of information with COVID all became corrupted. We used to be able to go to the National Institutes of Health or go to Mayo Clinic online or what have you. It all become corrupted. Who became the heroes? Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. They said, listen, here's a treatment protocol. Here's a list of doctors who are willing to do it. And here's a list of telemedicine services. AAPSonline.org. They basically provided an answer for the nation. That was huge. That was in October of 2020. The Frontline Critical Care Network, led by Corrick and Mary, they did the same thing. This was critical. You know, there was a doctor in Florida here who's so sick to his stomach on what's going on. Ben Marble. Got to have him on. Great guy. Ben says, I am sick over this. He's kind of a computer whiz. He formed his own nationwide telemedicine company.
That's so cool.
Called myfreedoctor.com.
That's what I got. I'm a coder. By nature, I'm a coder. So I think that's super cool.
Myfreedoctor.com. You know what Ben said is?
Myfreedoctor.com.
He said it's free. If you
It's
log
free.
in, I'll do the best I can. I'll get some of my friends. It's free. And if you are so inclined and you want to give a donation for charity, give a donation. And he basically, Ben Marble, in the last set of U.S. Senate testimonies, Ben Marble says, we've treated hundreds of thousands of Americans. And now he's honest. We've lost a few people. All of us have lost a few patients. Mm-hmm. He goes, but I've saved hundreds of thousands.
Did he drop the mic?
You can't make this up. So what happened is Corey gives the first set of U.S. Senate testimony in May of 2020. Second one was the big hit. I led it for the majority. Again, Senator Ron Johnson, Gary Peters in the minority. And I go up first, presenting McCullough protocol. We can do this. Harvey Risch provides good evidence review from Yale. He doesn't treat physicians. And then George Fareed, who looks like Moses, he's at the end of his career. He comes out of retirement. He goes to South Central California. Him and Brian Tyson open up a COVID clinic. They have a tent. People are coming in, coughing all over them. They test people outside, and they start treating people. They treat thousands of people. And George Fareed testifies. They ultimately publish a book. Said, we treated 6,000 people. This is how we did it. They published a monograph for the results. So George is there. He trained at the National Institutes of Health. He went to Harvard. So here we are.
The Harvard that didn't want to be bothered.
So the minority witness is Ashish Jha. Now, Dr. Jha is the current coronavirus coordinator for the White House. And Jha is very sophisticated. He's a CNN correspondent. And he's like, Dr. McCullough and Dr. Risch and Dr. Fareed, you just don't have enough evidence, and we need to be evidence-based. My patients expect me to be evidence-based.
I'm sorry, who are you again?
And the only things that we're going to have that are going to have enough patients in randomized trials are going to be the vaccines. There's not enough evidence for any of these drugs. And Senator Johnson knew the game. Johnson waits about 2 hours into this. And he said, Dr. Jha, have you ever seen a COVID patient? Have you ever treated a COVID patient? And Jha stops, pauses, gets flushed. The camera's getting a little foggy. He said, no, I haven't. Oh. And then Twitter blows up. They said, listen, this guy has been advising America for 2 hours. He's never even seen a COVID patient. And to this day, we have people on TV, these advisors, and you see them typically on the liberal media, CNN and others, and even our White House people. They don't treat patients. Now, we saw a glimmer. We saw a glimmer of this, and that was of hope, I think, that's when Trump got COVID.
Yeah.
Trump gets COVID. And you remember, now he's, at the time he was, I think, 70 or over 70, on the heavier side, big man. gets COVID, and he's got an earlier version of it, which is far more fatal. And then the doctor at the time is Sean Connolly. If you remember this guy, he comes out. He's a DO, really good-looking guy.
Oh, yeah.
I thought at first he had gotten the actor, and I'm like,
John
what did
Connery.
He came
Yeah,
out,
because it's Trump.
he was handpicked. He was handpicked by Ronnie Jackson. Ronnie used to be Trump's doctor. Ronnie's now a state representative of Texas, and I know Ronnie. He picks Connolly. Connolly goes out with a swagger. He's got an open collar. He goes, listen, we're bringing the president to Walter Reed. We're going to give some medicines, and we're going to get him right through it. Kind of winked at the camera. I said, that's the guy. Let's get a guy who knows how to treat patients, who's got some guts, and who's confident, and he's going to get people through the illness. Now, Trump gets a combination of drugs. He gets famotidine. He gets the other supplements. He gets an early version of the Regeneron monoclonal antibodies. He gets steroids. He needs oxygen for a little bit. But within a week or so, Trump's back. Trump's back. He's not slaughtered by the virus. He doesn't go 2 weeks with no treatment. Trump gets early treatment. He gets an early version of the McCullough protocol, and he's through it. So the thing that really, really got me going is America saw the president get through COVID with multi-drug early treatment, and Americans didn't call for it. The nursing homes didn't call for it. The hospitals didn't do it. Trump didn't get out there himself and say, listen, I got through it. Every doctor, do what Connolly did. Just follow the example. He doesn't do it. No one actually leads with this wonderful example. It's a lost opportunity. And we quickly get mired into more controversies. Let's talk about masks and lockdowns and this and that and travel restrictions. We never get back to treatment. So in the November 2020 hearings, I present a concept which I published called the 4 Pillars of Pandemic Response. I said, listen, if we're going to beat the virus, we need to have 4 teams in Washington, not one guy, 4 teams. A team on reducing the spread of the illness. Turns out the nasal washes would have been the key. Team number 2 is early treatment. That would have been me and my team, Corey, Merrick, others. Team number 3, hospital treatment. To this day, we still don't see a U.S. leader on hospital treatment. Who is the U.S. leader? The best one I can think of is Dr. Verone, but there's nobody at the Mayo Clinic who claims to be good at treating COVID or Harvard. Nobody. And then the 4th one would be vaccines. And with vaccines could play a role, even though there's never been a vaccine that's ever done anything for an infection in the nose or the sinuses. There's never been a vaccine that's reduced mortality from a respiratory illness. They still could play a role. I mean, I'm not against vaccines, but it's kind of a long shot. Vaccines could have played a role, and I've interviewed for McCullough Report a vaccine expert who's really a pro-vaccine person in the UK. His name is Hamid Merchant. He said, yeah, because COVID vaccines could have worked. He says, but they'd have to be a nasal mist. You've got to spray it up the nose to get immunity in the nose. You can't give a shot in the arm and get anything in the nose. No. The swab goes in the nose. The virus is in the nose.
You're tested in the nose.
Right. You're tested. You got to do something in the nose. There's never been a shot in the arm that's done anything for in the nose.
That goes over everybody's head, though. That's crazy.
So it's just but that should be something.
That should be headline news.
So what happened in this? So that was November testimony. December, I told Johnson, I said, listen, don't stop now.
Congratulations to him.
In December, get a second set of testimony. He had Pierre Corey up. Corey shows up in the U.S. Senate with his lab coat, and he gives one of the most impassioned speeches of all time. Great man. We have Jane Orient. We had Ray Askewy, who's a cardiologist, raised like me, trying to treat patients at Johns Hopkins. Had some others presenting on other aspects. And that's the 3rd set of testimony. And so what happens is we go an entire year now. And in January of 2022, Johnson said, I'm calling everybody. And it's going to be called COVID-19, A Second Opinion, January 24th, 2022, a day after the Defeat the Mandates rally in D.C., because we were all there. And Johnson says, I want you guys, and I want every one of you to say how you treat COVID, that you can do it. I want experts on the vaccines. I want a full vetting of the vaccines, and I want to hear from everybody. So we have probably a dozen or more doctors. We've got research scientists, vaccine consultants. We've got nurses who took care of patients in the hospital. We got patients, and we have attorneys. We're in the Kennedy caucus room. We've got a big round table. The press, we have chairs there for every public health official. Walensky, Fauci, all the oversight people. nobody shows. Nobody shows. They're going to get a second opinion from the experts in the field. Now, these are people who have never seen a COVID patient, and they don't show up. Let this podcast and let history record these events. That was a stunning. That was 5 hours of continuous testimony. We didn't even take a restroom break. I co-moderated it with Johnson. It's condensed to a 38-minute YouTube video. Everybody ought to watch it. There is truth bomb after truth bomb after truth bomb. And I'll give you an example of one where Christina Parks is there. She's a PhD molecular biologist. She's studying what's going on, African-American from Michigan. And I asked her, I said, Dr. Parks, are African-Americans being denied early treatment at this time?
Tell me not. Don't tell me.
She said, Dr. McCullough, yes, they are. My dad just died of COVID, and we couldn't get monoclonal antibodies. You know, in the McCullough protocol, that gray bar there is very important. Monoclonal antibodies were produced in Operation Warp Speed. They are a product of American innovation.
Remember there was like 10 million of them? Or there was a gazillion of them available. And then all of a sudden like that, when they started working, boom, it was hell to get.
It was hell to get them. Why is it? I had somebody yesterday, very, very sick with COVID, a senior index case. We are struggling to get monoclonal antibodies. So anything that was going to help people, even the U.S. high-tech expensive products, were suppressed. This is very important. It's not just cheap generic stuff. Even the monoclonal antibodies. Why didn't we have infusion centers in nursing homes? Why didn't we have 1-800 numbers? Why didn't we have billboards up so people could get monoclonal antibodies? There was a paper by Huang and colleagues published in JAMA that asked the question, of people who were hospitalized, did they get a shot at monoclonal antibodies? Did they? Answer, 15% got some monoclonal antibodies.
15%?
Do you know, of those people who got hospitalized afterwards, they were pretty sick, they survived the hospitalization.
I bet they did.
Those who got no monoclonal antibodies, they were toast.
15%.
You don't hear that, though.
You don't hear that.
It's terrible. Recently, I was asked to review a paper, and I asked the question. Everybody wants to talk about COVID mortality in the hospital. I said, what percent of people actually got any early treatment, even at this day? Answer, 5% overall.
I got going on the COVID route here, and this is a question, I guess, as a doctor to a doctor. My grandmother used to always say, my mom, wash your hands, your germs. My grandmother used to say, let them play, let them get the germs. Your body needs germs. Your body needs to know how to fight off germs and all that type of stuff. You go into the time when we're all isolated. We can't even look at somebody in the eyes or we're going to melt. You got to put on a mask. You got to do all this stuff. In your opinion, or maybe fact, did that make matters even worse because you're staying away from even a sickness? And I'm not saying if you're 90 to go get the sickness. Oh, let me go get COVID or let me go get sick. But if you're a healthy person, it's okay to get sick.
This episode is sponsored by Aurora. Do you know what the fastest growing crime in America is? For years, this crime rate has been surging and affecting millions of Americans. I'm talking about identity theft, and there's a new victim every 14 seconds. Yet despite this, those who have had their identity stolen are often shocked when it happens. That's why I'm excited to partner with Aurora, who is sponsoring this video. Aurora is identity theft protection, fraud monitoring, a VPN, password management, and antivirus software all into one easy-to-use app. Their VPN allows you to stay anonymous online by keeping your browsing history and personal information safe and encrypted. Protect you and your family from America's fastest growing crime. Try Aurora for free for 2 weeks and see if you or anyone in your family's personal information has been compromised. Start your free trial today. Go to aurora.com/MSCS. The link is in the description below.
Am I right?
You're asking about immune challenges.
Yeah.
And I think for sure in children, which is very interesting, when we took the kids out of school and the kids had to wear masks, they weren't exposed to the usual infectious disease challenges to the extent they used to be. And then as we emerged out of the pandemic, there was an outbreak of adenovirus hepatitis. People ask, well, some kids needed liver transplants. I go, how did this happen? Because they probably were thrown off in terms of their immunity. Right now we're hearing a convergence of COVID, influenza, and respiratory syncytial virus in the hospital. Again, because we've probably thrown off the immune surveillance. Today, you're going to see this in the news. It came up on my news feed. Wow. Today, there's a man. Now, he probably had mental illness, but he was in Iran or Iraq. I could pull it up. But he refused to take a bath. He's a guy who basically claims he has not taken a bath or a shower in 60 years.
Oh, boy.
And you'll see it. You guys are going to see it on the news. Is he married? Okay. No, he's in his upper 90s. And I sent this to my co-author, John Leake, because I said, John, he's got to see this. And I wrote to John, I said, there's a theory that germs are good for you. And there he is, the world's dirtiest man at 94 in Iran. He dies a few months after his first bath. So I mean, the reason I'm making is there is a theory that dirt is good for you. That if you're exposed to a lot of dirt and various things, your body becomes pretty hardy. And the poor guy takes a bath and he keels over and he dies. He's probably at the end of his life, but that did make The Guardian. You have it up in Z News. But we should move on, though, in the final segment, though. But what happened was I'm convinced now, and I told Tucker Carlson this in May of 2021. I said, Tucker, treatment is being intentionally suppressed. Americans are being intentionally harmed by government agencies, CDC, FDA, and NIH. The hospitals are in on it. The medical schools are in on it. The doctors are in on it. Everybody's in on this.
We're losing our parents.
And we're losing our parents and our grandparents. I go, this is a slaughterhouse and it doesn't need to happen. And he goes, why is this happening? And I said, Tucker, I'm just a doctor. I don't know. But all I can tell you is those who are most strongly trying to suppress treatment, the ones who are really saying don't treat them, are the same ones who are promoting the vaccines. The two are together.
One
of the most blatant examples is the American Medical Association, which is, in a sense, a doctor's political action committee, AMA. The AMA, in September of 2021, comes out with a campaign, an official campaign. Now, they should be doing something healthy, right? Their campaign was to abolish the use of ivermectin. Abolish it.
I remember that.
Abolish it.
Yep.
What? Why? And at the same time, promoting the vaccines. They were wildly promoting take a vaccine. Doesn't matter what vaccine, just take a vaccine. So let's talk about the vaccines rolling out. So the first vaccine to roll out was Pfizer. December 2020. Pfizer's out of the gate.
That's a great one to trust.
Okay. What we now know to make a short story, is people started taking Pfizer and they started dying. People took Pfizer, they died. The family members called Pfizer and said, my grandparent just died. They took your product, they died. Pfizer recorded in their records 1,223 deaths of people who died shortly after taking Pfizer on the same day, next day. I mean, right there.
On the same day or next day?
Next day. It's almost instantaneous. And so Pfizer recorded all this. And Pfizer didn't pull their product off the market. Pfizer, I tell you, 5 deaths, 10 deaths. This didn't happen in the clinical trial. Something went bad with the public offering.
Doctor, isn't it at 10 deaths you have to put like a red label? At 20 deaths you got to put a black label and pull it and redo it? Right, you got to be a black
box. There's got to be something.
It's like under 50, not...
Yeah, I've chaired day safety monitoring boards, and you get to 50 or 60. There's just no way this is going to be tolerated. You know, swine flu pandemic, 1976, it was like 25 deaths, and people said, no, we can't have Americans go in and take a shot and die. No, we can't allow that to happen. Pfizer let it happen, and the FDA let it happen. And when this came to the point of legal requests where lawyer firm said, listen, send the records. This is ridiculous. Send the records. No, we're not going to send the records. You know, it comes in a court order. The lawyer for the FDA says, no, we don't want this to get out for 55 years. The FDA. And so when this came out, our jaws dropped. We said, wait a minute. People were dying of Pfizer, and the FDA was trying to cover it up. This is early on. Looking back at it now, in the VAERS database, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System database, there was already a signal there was a signal in January of 2021. There was actually more deaths than we should have seen. Pfizer should have been pulled off the market before February 1st of 2021, and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson never should have come out. Something went bad. Because the deaths in the clinical trials, the big randomized trials, they didn't have big death signals like this.
Well, is that because when something was wrong, they'd say, oh, that was the policeable?
There weren't that many deaths in the clinical trials. What we realized in the clinical trials, the rate of anybody getting COVID was way less than 1%. That was a disappointment. So a lot of people never got exposed to it. 60% of the people were healthy. They had no medical problems. And the Chinese published a paper, which I think was really, really interesting. The Chinese published a paper and said, listen, we're studying this, the pattern of blood test results in people who take the vaccine. And the Chinese said, be careful in giving the vaccine to people who have medical problems. Because if you start giving the vaccine to people with medical problems, it looks like you're going to have problems. And that's exactly what happened. They took the vaccines into the nursing homes, and people started to die. We saw these signals, which was these mortality signals, which were striking. The Chinese paper, just to give you the citations,
it's just so it's just one thing after another.
It's mind-boggling.
You got only one hospital that does anything. You got only a handful of, expert doctors that actually care. You have, your dads, grandpas, kids dying, and everybody's lying and hiding and then you got the FDA involved. Saying it's okay.
I think it's a confluence of fear. People are like, well, listen, I don't want to get it myself. It's a confluence of the government overreach, and somehow people are looking to the government to save us. Since when does the government save us? Mm-hmm. So the Chinese predict this. People start dying with the vaccine. McLachlan and colleagues come out in April of 2021 and they say, get the VAERS data, get the vaccine adverse event reporting data, get all the data, and let's review all the vignettes and figure out, are they really dying of the vaccine? An important analysis. They find 86% of the deaths have no other explanation outside they took the vaccine. They die within a couple days of taking the vaccine. And they say, who's dying? It was our seniors at the time. So again, these are these hidden deaths. People were dying within a few days. Look at the McLachlan analysis here. We believe the focus is the primary reason that 80% of the post-vaccination deaths are reported in this age group. One-tenth, 9% expired only within 6 hours of taking the shot. 18% died in less than 12 hours. Over one-third, 36%, did not survive the following day. This was a wrecking machine for America's nursing homes.
They're even saying that.
This is the McLachlan analysis. This is very important. Look where we are now. This is the Red Box report. So this is through September 30th of 2022. You go to openvaersdata.com, toggle over to U.S. data so you don't get the international. Our CDC is certifying 14,696 deaths of Americans who've died after the vaccine. A couple 100,000 hospitalizations and ER visits. We've got 15,019 permanently disabled Americans from the vaccines.
Come on.
We've got 8,990 cases of myocarditis, pericarditis, and look where the action occurs. Most of it is on the first or second day after taking the vaccine,
look.
And then it trails off.
First 2 days, super dangerous.
And look at all the vaccines combined here. We don't see really any action. All of a sudden, when the COVID vaccines come out, these things go off the Richter scale.
That's
this
spike.
Is a biological product safety disaster of calamitous magnitude. There's no other way to state it.
You can't wrap your head around this.
So we've gone through two chairmen of the FDA. The current chairman of the FDA, Robert Califf, who's a well-respected cardiologist from Duke from a long time, he is a clinical trialist. He's a drug safety expert. He's someone who's very well respected. How in the world can he let this go on? How in the world?
Is he afraid? Is that what it is?
Nobody
They're afraid?
knows.
They got to be
Nobody
afraid.
knows. They won't show up to meetings.
Fear.
They won't show up to meetings. There's no interaction. Senator Johnson's written Califf letters saying, explain what's going on, explain the risk benefits here. The only thing we see is no attention to safety, but let's give more vaccines and let's give it to progressively younger people. And in the last year, we haven't even heard about the senior citizens. The only thing we've heard about is kids and school-age kids. Why are we hearing about them now? The worry has always been on older people. I'm a doctor. I don't worry about young kids with COVID. It's like a common cold. Our CDC has said 86% of kids have already had COVID. It's already over with. So there's no opportunity for a vaccine. Look at the Zogby data here. Zogby, a representative survey of Americans done a few months ago. 15% of Americans who've taken the vaccine have some new medical problem. They got a new medical problem. 15% have got a blood clot, heart damage, neurologic damage.
And that's probably lowballed.
Well, no, it's a representative survey. I mean, that's a relative disaster. You know, the hardest question I got from Joe Rogan, we didn't have this, but he said, listen, McCullough, if these vaccines are so bad, how come everybody isn't dead? And I didn't have the answer, but I have the answer now. Sasha Latypova, Trial Site News, a pharmaceutical consultant, has analyzed the data in terms of adverse events and deaths according to the lot on the vaccine card, the lot. 30% of all the damage with Pfizer, 80% of all the damage with Pfizer is in 30% of the lots, and it's 80% of all the damage with Moderna is in 25% of the lots. She calls them hot lots. If you get a hot lot, you're going to get fried with this vaccine. And a hot lot is actually probably well-manufactured product, well-cooled, well-transported, nurses being very careful of those in the pharmacy and getting that shot. Everything else that we do to the vaccines reduces the quality, degrades it, right? So leave it out, leave it in the sun, inject a lot of air in it, don't cool it so well, leave it out on a shipping pallet for a day or two. So what's happening is most people, 85% of people take the vaccine, nothing happens, they're probably getting a relative dud. By the grace of God and human error, they're getting dud. And by the way, with the EUA contracts for the products, no inspections. There's no FDA inspections of quality and purity, none. These things roll off the line.
Yes. How can that not be inspected?
Yes. And so, you know, Japan is going nuts over this. The Japanese get these shipments of Pfizer and Moderna. They see crud at the bottom, and they're returning millions of lots. You can go find this on
yeah, because we'll take them here probably.
Can you imagine that? We inspect Tylenol. We inspect chewing gum. But we're not going to inspect messenger or adenoviral DNA and lipid nanoparticles.
Let alone an injection?
The emergency use authorization says, the contracts say no inspection. And by the way, Pfizer and Moderna don't make these. Subsidiary companies make them, and they just ship them directly. The companies are basically a marketing shell. Well, the complications are clearly in the heart and nervous system. The death story, Nick Pantazatos and Herb Seligman from Columbia have tried to use an ecological analysis using census data and vaccine administration data. They estimate through December of 2021, we could have been as high as 187,000 Americans dying with the vaccine. 187K. Now, you may say, well, VAERS only has 14K. How does that work out? In order to report a death to VAERS, it's typically a doctor, nurse, paramedic, or coroner. You have to have the vaccine card. You have to have all the circumstances. You have to submit everything. And it's done under threat of imprisonment or federal fines if you lie.
That's unbelievable.
So what's in VAERS is solid, but it's a gross underreporting. So people have said, listen, VAERS could be 1% of reality. If that's the case, that means 1.4 million Americans. Jessica Rose, who's studied, and I've published with her, epidemiologist, she believes the underreporting factor is at about 31. That still means 600,000 people who have died of the vaccine.
Over 500,000, easily.
So let's look at the mortality. With COVID, before the vaccines came out, when I testified in the U.S. Senate, we ultimately lost about 250,000 Americans. With COVID, no vaccine. Since the vaccines have come out, we've lost another 750,000 Americans with the vaccines as our major public health response, and potentially tack on another 500,000 with the vaccines due to the vaccines. So we're in an astonishing times at this point in time. The biggest thing that people are worried about, though, is myocarditis, and I do want to go over that quickly. It's proven.
If you could.
It's proven. Yeah. Baumeier and colleagues in Germany, they find the spike protein, which is produced by these vaccines. The vaccines install the genetic material, produce the spike protein. Baumeier finds the spike protein in the heart of people who have myocarditis. So it's proven. The myocarditis is not a mystery. It's due to the fact that the vaccines install the spike protein in the heart. Tracy Hogue publishes from UC Davis that nearly 90% of these young people are hospitalized. A boy is more likely to be hospitalized with myocarditis than ever be saved of COVID. So, I went on Laura Ingraham. I went on the news. I knew about this analysis.
That should be plastered everywhere.
I said, Laura, no young person should ever receive these. None. And, the health minister for Denmark ultimately said, no young person should receive these. Joe Ladapo, Surgeon General of Florida, Ron DeSantis, nobody should receive these. So, I'm not alone because the data suggested harm. 94% hospitalized in this analysis from Cedars-Sinai. This is Rose and myself showing the peak age is 18 to 24, but it extends up to people in their 50s.
Now, if I'm 21 and I get myocarditis, tell me how I'm going to feel. What's my life going to be like?
Half of the kids have no symptoms. They have generally fever and body aches after taking the vaccine, but you don't feel anything. The first manifestation is going to be death.
Ugh.
Now, half of the kids,
what I was afraid of.
half the kids get some chest pain. They get something we can work with and we can treat them. You can see here Jenna Showers published huge areas of damage to the heart in MRI. This is a whopper here. This young person, anything more than 15% of the heart damage is a big number. 26% initially, now down to 19.84%. Anything more than 15, we put in a defibrillator. These kids are getting fried with myocarditis. This is a U.S. study published in the journal Pediatrics.
That is so scary. You don't even know.
Look at these fatal cases. Choi from Korea, 22-year-old man, takes his second dose of Pfizer, has chest pain for 5 days, comes into a Korean hospital. He's dead in 7 hours. His heart is loaded with inflammation. They can't save him. This is stunning. How about this? This is in Connecticut. 2 teenage boys. On days 3 and 4 after taking the second dose of Pfizer, the parents find them in bed, dead. The boys are dead. No opportunity for CPR. No opportunity to call 911. The parents are horrified. They ask for autopsies. The coroner does the autopsy. He calls in University of Michigan and University of Minnesota. They all agree. The vaccines caused fatal myocarditis. When these fatal cases came in, our FDA had a duty to put a massive warning out to every parent that their child could die of myocarditis. The consent form should have changed. There should have been so much public health messaging about fatal myocarditis. Instead, nothing.
Can you imagine that? You think it's the right thing to do or whatever. You go in, school says you have to do it. You go in to check on your son or your little daughter. What happened?
What the schools who are mandating this, or the universities that are mandating this, what do? Do they say they're sorry afterwards? Is this? Do we say, is this okay?
They don't care. They're like the rest of them. They don't care.
Look at this. This is Patone and colleagues, Circulation. 100 fatal cases. 51 with AstraZeneca, 49 with Pfizer. If there's 100 in this paper in Circulation, our best cardiology journal, I can tell you there are thousands and thousands out there. This is not.
No, I dumb guy in the room question again over here. Myocarditis. What? Speak to
myocarditis is heart inflammation. So the heart should be left alone. The vaccine should not install genetic code in the heart to cause the spike protein to produce. The spike protein is foreign. The body's going to attack the spike protein. You don't want any attack going on in the heart. When the heart's inflamed, it can produce these arrhythmias we've gone over, and it can lead to sudden death. And this is what I've said, and my counterpart in the UK has come out on this, Asim Malhotra. Now, he's younger and more handsome than I am, but let me tell you what, Malhotra, who's a big deal over there, initially he takes the vaccine himself out. He comes out on Good Morning Britain and says, everybody should take the vaccine. His dad, a prominent doctor in the UK, takes the vaccine and dies. Malhotra reached out to me. He goes, I can't believe what's happened. He goes, I think my dad died of the vaccine. We go over all the data. I said, yeah, I think you're right. He's devastated. He's absolutely devastated. He says, I have to do my own research. I have to do my own analysis. And he works on this for a year. He publishes 2 tandem papers carefully outlining this. Malhotra comes out and he says, stop it. Stop the vaccines. The vaccines are causing fatal cases. Now, Malhotra and myself said publicly, at this point in time, any person dying in our country, that they die suddenly, and unexpectedly, it's due to the vaccine unless the family comes forward and tells us they didn't take the vaccine. That is the new thing. Let me tell you what. You know the very first case that happened? Hank Aaron. Hank Aaron takes the vaccine in January of 2021, and a few days later he dies.
Right.
Now, he was well enough to hold a press conference that he took the vaccine and he's dead. And then it went from there, went to Marvin Hagler, a beautiful African-American CNN legal correspondent. We've had prominent person after prominent person. In the last 2 days, we had former Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, dies 68. And Megyn Kelly's sister 2 days ago, age 58. And just go on and on and on and on in these deaths. And what we are not seeing is the family coming out and saying it wasn't the vaccine. One of the most prominent ones, the daughter of Democratic Congressman Sean Casten, Illinois. Casten says, got to take the vaccine, got to take the vaccine. I'm going to get my family vaxxed. He comes out and publicly says that he's taken the vaccine. He's vaxxed his kids. His 17-year-old daughter, which he's now said in the Hill, he said it publicly, she was perfectly healthy. She was looking forward to the rest of her life. He finds her dead in bed.
Oh, what a shame.
These myocarditis deaths occurred with a surge of adrenaline and cortisol in the morning when they're still in bed. So death in bed, and then during sports. In the athletic arena, the U.S. Olympic Committee, there's some subcommittee that keeps track of this. Generally in sports, of which tens of thousands, or if not hundreds of thousands of people play soccer and rugby all over the world, the number of deaths that's recorded is roughly 29 per year. It can happen. People can die of heat exhaustion, stroke, other things. Heat stroke. Right now, 1376.
I believe it. I've heard that.
And you see these montages now of athlete after athlete going down, high school players, college players, and the tension, right? Kyrie Irving. He said, listen, I'm not taking it. I've seen enough. I'm not taking it.
How about Aaron Rodgers?
Aaron Rodgers gets McCullough protocol. He said, I'm not taking it.
Absolutely did.
Look at Cole Beasley.
Yeah.
Look at Novak Djokovic.
Yeah.
And he just comes out and said, listen.
Now that's some bullshit. That's the best tennis player
in the world. He said, listen, I'm not getting myocarditis. I don't need it. It's not going to happen. These guys.
And they don't let them go play.
Well, look at Aaron Rodgers went on Joe Rogan, and he laid out the vaccine discrimination that he faced.
Yeah.
Oh, my
He couldn't practice with the team during the regular season, but then the playoffs come. Oh, now you can come with the team. Now you can come with the team now.
But everybody else
it's
got
the
COVID.
playoffs.
Everybody else got
but
COVID.
everybody else got COVID.
They're at the bar.
I know, but think about this. What Aaron said, and he disclosed this. He said, listen, I have a polyethylene glycol allergy. So both Pfizer and Moderna are made with polyethylene glycol. There can be fatal allergies to it. Aaron knows about his allergy, right? So he knows about this. And he tells the Packers, says, listen, I got an allergy. I can't take it. In our country, we are so concerned about allergies that we will not allow a single peanut on an airplane because a child may have a peanut allergy. We are that concerned about allergies.
That's right.
Now, Aaron says he has a known allergy to polyethylene glycol, and the Packers say, we don't care. The NFL says, we don't care. Take the vax. Wait a minute. Why do we care about peanut allergies on the airlines with such great fervor, but one of the greatest quarterbacks in the league, we don't give a damn about his polyethylene glycol allergy? Do the Packers want to lose their MVP? I was on yesterday with Michelle Tafoya, who used to be, my wife loves her. She's on the sidelines of Monday Night Football.
Yeah.
Michelle says, you cannot believe the mentality of the NFL. I said, they really don't care, Michelle? She goes, they don't care. They don't care about Aaron Rodgers. They don't care. The schools don't care. I mean, this is really, really important. These cases cannot be understated. I mean, I just want to make this point. I'm going to go to social media real quick.
Sure.
Because a case that Rogan knew the vignette, and he gives me the vignette, and he gives me the vignette of this wonderful African-American woman. Here she is, Simone Scott. Listen to this. 19-year-old Northwestern University freshman develops myocarditis in the spring of 2021, receives a heart transplant 6 weeks after Moderna, and she dies after the heart transplant. She dies. She dies. Her family's outraged.
How can
Okay,
you let
it can't be any more clear than this. These
how if that
products
was your kid?
should have
Yeah.
been off the market, you guys. This idea that a university is going to tell everybody they must take one and that some are going to die of myocarditis is completely unacceptable. I don't care if these were the best products under the sun. It's unacceptable. It's immoral. It's unethical. And from a civil perspective, it's illegal.
Is this something that, like, I guess you get the vaccine 2 years ago, whatever it was, and does it run its course and it's out of your body and it's done, or is this something that can haunt you years and years down the road from now?
Because they're brand new, we don't know. What we know in a study from Stanford is the messenger RNA is stuck in lymph nodes for a couple months, and that's as long as they've looked. It may be longer. The spike proteins in the body, Bruce Patterson at IncellDX has shown for probably over a year. You keep taking more shots every 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Shots every 6 months, I'm telling you as a doctor, that stuff is building up.
How many boosters are we at now? I lost track at like 4.
4, I think.
It is atrocious. You know, they're keeping track in Canada. Somebody just sent a formal letter to the government. They're up to 80 doctors dead after the 4th shot. 80.
Wow.
80. The bivalent boosters came out. These ones are the recent one. That's the one Biden took yesterday, the bivalent booster. No human data. It failed in animal studies. The U.S. government pre-purchased these. The U.S. government pre-purchased these before the animal studies. The animal studies came out in 8 mice, and they failed. The animals got sick with Omicron. Of course, the antibodies went up, but that's a false surrogate. And they approved these bivalents. One of the first ladies in Canada takes it in Saskatoon, a nurse. She's already had 3 or 4 shots, but she's a nurse. She has to take it. She takes it. She's in the pharmacy, texting her daughter, falls over dead. It can't be any more clear than this. People are losing their lives. And so the tension in our country now, the tension is unreal. You have military walking off the job. We have people saying, listen, they're pulling their kids out of school. There are people saying, listen, I am not going to lose my life. I've already been through COVID. It's not that bad. The vaccines, it's just not worth it. We have not talked about efficacy, and it's important because if products aren't safe, it doesn't matter how good they are. If a car blew up and people died a death, you know, as soon as they drove off the parking lot in a car, that happened 3 or 4 times. It didn't matter how fast that car is. It doesn't matter how sexy that car is. The car is not going to make it. It's gone. It's gone. If you had a kitchen appliance that caused your house to be burned down, it's gone. We don't tolerate unsafe things. You're an engineer. You know this. If materials aren't safe, they're gone. These vaccines should have been gone. This idea. So we've had 2 horrors now. The horror is suppression of early treatment that promoted fear, suffering, hospitalization, and death, I think, to promote mass vaccination. And then when mass vaccination occurs, is promoting more death and suffering and heart damage. And we haven't had time to get into neurologic damage and blood clots and immunologic problems. So it's part 1 is horror show part 1. Now it's horror show part 2. And I've been on Laura Ingraham, Fox News. I'm a frequent contributor. I told Laura, I said, the day these vaccines go off the market, and they will be a national holiday. I'm taking a month off. You and I will go to Cabo.
Let's go.
Man. I mean, I'm telling you, it's just, these vaccines are a menace. Before we started, we said, we've never said the word vaccine so many times in our lives. I don't ever want to say the word again.
Me neither. And, you know, just yesterday, I saw a commercial about taking the vaccine. Just yesterday. As in yesterday. 1 day ago.
Now, advertising of pharmaceutical products. There's laws. There's the Truth in Advertising law. There's the Landman Act. The Landman Act says that it has to be based on science. You have to make claims that are based on science. And they have the U.S. Drug and Cosmetics Act. These advertising laws say that there must be fair balance. This is very important, fair balance. If a drug does something, you have to say what the side effects are. So you'll see this. Have you ever seen the commercials?
Oh, yeah.
There'll be a woman, and she's got psoriasis, and she's embarrassed to go out. But now she takes this wonderful drug, and she's dancing,
Causes
and she's
everything.
dating, and she's spinning around.
She's doing
in
jazz.
this backless dress, and she looks
Yeah.
wonderful,
Ooh.
and she's smiling, and she's taking this wonderful drug.
Got the bikini on now.
And then it says, warning. And it really fast.
This may cause
the next 90 seconds.
This may cause tuberculosis. This call your doctor. It may result in death. But the bottom line is they have to give some fair balance. With these vaccines, now you said you saw a commercial yesterday. Did the commercial say, warning, could cause fatal myocarditis like it happened in Simone Scott?
Absolutely not.
Did it say it can result in death in thousands upon thousands of senior citizens?
No, which is just completely sick.
It's sick.
Completely sick.
It's
nauseating and mind-blowing and just wrong.
Now,
evil.
This vignette was posted. Now, it happened over a year ago, but it was posted, came into my feed, and I reposted it. I posted it on Getter and Truth Social, and it's surviving. But if it was posted on YouTube, Twitter,
Gone.
Facebook, or Instagram, what would happen? Gone.
Wouldn't even have made it up.
Because any information on safety, this is a safety vignette. She took it. This is all factual. She takes the vaccine, she dies. Any information on safety on those social media platforms is censored. And it's censored because our agencies have said that this will lead to vaccine hesitancy. If more people know about this, they're not going to want to take the vaccine. And our agencies have said vaccine hesitancy is the problem. That is actually what we are trying to stop, is vaccine hesitancy. There are journal articles in New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA and other saying, listen, we've got to get rid of vaccine hesitancy. We've got to stamp this out. Any doctors that are promoting vaccine hesitancy are bad doctors. Right now, I'm under review from the American Board of Internal Medicine. They sent me a letter. They said, you've said some things that could lead somebody to not take a vaccine.
Okay.
Okay, well,
Aren't you
not
allowed to have your opinion?
Not every product is for everybody, right?
Right.
But their assumption is, listen, it's assumed these vaccines are good. It's assumed they're good, and don't question it. And whatever you do, don't say anything that could deter somebody from taking a vaccine. Don't give them any fair balance. Don't give them any warning. It's so bad that California, Gavin Newsom just signed a law, AB 2098. It says, listen, any doctor who presents something like this, license gone.
License gone?
Gone.
Wow.
Gone. So the accusation would be that doctor spread misinformation.
Is that guy crazy? Well, I know he's crazy. He is
That
crazy.
means that now listen, COVID treatment's complicated. I've been in this field now for 3 years. We can use different monoclonal antibodies. We can use Evusheld. We haven't talked about that in place of a vaccine. We can use Paxlovid. We can use preventive things. There's all kinds of things we can do. None of that. If I don't stay along a government narrative and I give any type of medical opinion, I could lose my license in California.
That's
So
insane.
I recently had my podcast, Jeff Barkey, family doctor, great guy, him and Mark McDonald suing California. Said, listen, this is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court, in a ruling in 2018, said doctors do have the right of free speech in their practice. We have a right of free speech. Okay. We're guaranteed that right. This bill is unconstitutional. It doesn't go into law until January 1st, and they want to make sure it's struck down. Because I can tell you right now, I've talked to doctors say, listen, I'm not taking care of COVID now. Forget it. I'm not losing my license over this. Californians are not going to receive care. Doctors are peeling out, saying, listen, this is the last straw. I can't do this anymore. And censorship, and I think there's more than a dozen states that have similar laws on the way. Australia, they've just legislated that. It's called getting delicensed. You're going to get delicensed if you said anything about COVID. An Australian doctor couldn't do what I'm doing right now. We couldn't review the data together.
Or he would be delicensed.
Be gone.
Wow.
Very not dissimilar to if we were to dial back the clock to Nazi Germany And let's say Hitler's on the rise, and you and I have a podcast, and you say, hey, Dr. McCullough, what do you say about Hitler? Say, listen, I think this guy is a megalomaniac. He's out of control. I'd be gone. The brown shirts would be waiting for me. Hey, it's no different. Totalitarianism and Nazism is no different than what we've seen right now. Another important word is fascism. Fascism. Fascism is when the government starts to manipulate private business to do something. So what we know under court order is America First Legal has gotten the documents. The CDC was regularly meeting with Facebook and Twitter, just like they said they would in Event 201. Remember, Event 201 was the planning meeting before COVID, where they said, listen, there's going to be a pandemic. This is what we're going to do, and we're going to use social media to shape the narrative. This was planned. This was planned. And that's what the CDC was doing. They were meeting with Twitter and saying, listen, how can we promote these vaccines? How do we get super users to promote the vaccines? How do we get the actors? You know, the Screen Actor Guild right now mandatorily says, listen, every person in Hollywood's got to take the vaccine. Without exception. The sports teams.
How does this happen?
I know, but this was all about the vaccines. It was all about the vaccines. Squash anything on treatment. No ivermectin, no hydroxychloroquine, no nasal sprays, nothing on steroids, monoclonal antibodies, make them hard to find. I mean, just squash everything except for the vaccines and promote the crud out of the vaccines. And that's what was going on the entire time. Social media has become basically a vaccine railroad, and it's so interesting. People have figured this out. So on social media, of which, I'm too old for social media, but Senator Johnson convinced me. So listen, McCullough, you've got to get in the game. You've got an important message. I'll say Instagram. Instagram has, by the way, the best artificial intelligence, AI.
Why do you say that?
Instagram, here's my Instagram.
Yeah, you have a lot. You're very popular. There's a lot of
I used to have more followers, but Instagram used to, and still does. They can actually read what's on your pictures and slides. They obviously read your text, but it can listen to the words. And what Instagram was doing is any mention of COVID, any mention of vaccines would get flagged. And boy, don't say the vaccines are bad. Whatever. You're gone. You're gone. And so what people learned how to do on Instagram, particularly on stories, is there's a little emoji where it says, get vaccinated. Mm-hmm. So you can actually put a story, and you can put somebody who's having a bad reaction from a vaccine, but say get vaccinated over it. And so Instagram thinks you're promoting the vaccine.
You beat their own algorithm.
But there's one with Dan Bongino. So Dan Bongino says here, he says, and I'm a friend of his show. Dan says, listen, I'm getting very anxious for good reasons. Now, Dan's got an indolent lymphoma. He's taken 3 of these shots. He's realized the data is coming out not favorable for them. And he keeps asking me, Doc, am I in trouble? Am I not? And the reason why I bring Dan Bongino up,
you can tell Dan wants to pop.
Yeah, he wants to pop. He's loaded. The reason why I bring this up is it's proven, and the FDA agrees, the vaccines cause heart damage and it results in death. The FDA agrees the vaccines cause blood clots, which are really a problem and can result in death and stroke. And the FDA agrees the vaccines cause neurologic damage, peripheral nerves and brain. That's what the FDA agrees to. But I'm going to predict this, and this is what Dan's concerned about as someone with a lymphoma. If, I'm not saying it's proven, but if the vaccines are also proven to cause cancer or increase the risk of cancer, you are going to see a panic in this nation like you've never seen before. A mass panic, and this is really important, because the vaccines are long-lasting. The spike protein is long-lasting. People already have familial or other cancer risks. Dan already has cancer. People know they can't get it out of their body now. The CDC is telling us 87% of Americans have taken at least one shot now. 87%. That's what the CDC says, and let's not challenge them. Over 65, we're talking 99% of people have taken it. So there's very few unvaccinated people around. President Biden yesterday said, this winter's going to be terrible, And it's going to be absolutely positively driven by the unvaccinated. They are the problems. The hospitals are going to be overflowing. There's no unvaccinated people left to point to anymore. I mean, everyone's taking it.
What do you think they're giving him?
You know, he rolled for his next shot. Rochelle Lewinsky, CDC director, has got COVID again. She's already fully boosted. I mean, these are examples. And so there's been, on the efficacy side, there's been false claims. So the first false claim is the vaccines stop COVID. Well, the original clinical trials actually showed they did reduce the rates of COVID, but the absolute risk reductions were less than 1%. So we knew this wasn't going to work publicly. But then the CDC started recording thousands of breakthrough hospitalizations and deaths. Fully vaccinated people early in 2021 were being hospitalized. The CDC says we can't keep up with this. May 1st of 2021, the CDC puts out, we're going to stop tracking it. So first claim goes down. It doesn't stop. It doesn't stop COVID. It doesn't stop COVID. Okay, so that's done. The second claim is, well, it stops transmission. You know, that was the whole thing. That's the reason why the military, the schools, we don't want people giving COVID to each other. There were fully vaccinated weddings, cruise boats. Everyone was giving. Fully vaccinated people were giving it. Then so some critical papers came out, and the authors were Chow in Asia, but then Acharian, Rimarisma, Accorsi, and the fully vaccinated were loaded with virus, and they were giving it to each other when they were sick. So the CDC director comes out in the summer of 2021 and says, time out. The vaccines don't stop transmission. They do not stop transmission.
They stop counting.
They just don't. They don't stop. Don't rely on this to make your workplace safer. So when the CDC said this, everybody should have dropped mandates, right? There's no reason it doesn't. And now in August of 2022, our CDC said a fully vaccinated person is indistinguishable from an unvaccinated person from a public health perspective. These are strong sentences and messages to employers in the military to not have vaccine mandates. There's no reason to have a mandate if the vaccines don't stop transmission. Recently, Michael Roos, who's a member of parliament, you guys should probably show this. It's really funny. He's grilling a Pfizer executive. He goes, and I want to know the answer. He's a real handsome blonde-haired guy, Dutch guy. I want to know the answer. Did you test whether these vaccines stop transmission? She goes, no, we didn't. And it's like, what? That's what this is all about. This vaccines were supposed to protect one another. People took vaccines to protect their grandmothers. That was the whole purpose of doing it. That's the only reason why a young person would take a vaccine is to protect somebody older. They didn't even test it, and it doesn't even do that.
And they're admitting it.
It doesn't even do it, and they're admitting it. And so the final false claim, and this one was a tough one, where it said, listen, the vaccines have pretty much failed across the board. But if you've taken a vaccine, you're going to get a milder case.
Oh, yeah.
Consolation prize. Well, what happened there? The virus mutated from wild type to alpha to beta. The worst one was gamma, by the way, in Brazil. We never had that. Delta was tough for us. Omicron. Omicron was a huge difference. I can tell you clinically I've managed all of them. Very mild. Very little pulmonary invasion. Almost always like a head cold. Omicron is basically a breeze. And so we're easily managing Omicron. Since Omicron hit, I've had one person in the hospital. One. I just saw him in the clinic on Monday. And he's perfectly fine. He said he needed oxygen for about 30 minutes. There was nothing to it. Omicron is easy. So what people have said is, well, the vaccine made it easy. Well, Omicron was easy for everybody because it had mutated. And so when we look back at the randomized trials never demonstrated reductions in hospitalizations and deaths with vaccines, neither primary or secondary endpoint. So you need a randomized trial to make the claim that the vaccines make it milder, number one. Number two, the only things that make COVID milder is having it before, natural immunity, prior immunity, or getting early treatment. We've already covered that exhaustively. So the studies that make the claim that a vaccinated person has a milder case never account for those two major factors. And I can tell you the fully vaccinated, they're the first ones to ask for treatment because they're worried about COVID, right?
Yeah.
So it's all confounded. It's all selection bias. The vaccines don't reduce hospitalization and death. The consent form doesn't say to reduce hospital. So when you take the consent form, it doesn't say you're taking this vaccine to reduce your risk of hospitalization and death. No, the consent form doesn't grant that claim. The FDA doesn't grant that claim. So President Biden yesterday was basically saying to take a vaccine to somehow make it milder, Yet there's no regulatory claim for this. So this is a prima facie evidence of what we call a false narrative. This is propaganda. Propaganda is false information given out by people in positions of authority. No one at the federal level should have ever said the vaccines reduce hospitalization and death unless there's a granted claim. The FDA has to grant those claims. FDA doesn't grant that claim. It's a fairy tale that the vaccines reduce hospitalization and death.
And the FDA, what's the point of it? What's the game? The game, is it political, money, lobbyists?
Can you imagine the finger pointing at the end? This whole thing.
Boy.
This whole thing's gonna blow up.
Oh yeah.
Let's take Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense. You've seen pictures of Lloyd Austin. You ought to find him on the internet. He's wearing masks.
Type in Lloyd Austin.
He's wearing a Darth Vader shield. I mean, it's just Lloyd Austin, who's already had COVID, but this guy is someone who is a strong military man, but let me tell you, he's a mouse when it comes to COVID. He is so fearful of COVID. Anyhow, you take Lloyd Austin in the end, and they're going to say, listen, take a picture of him, put Lloyd Austin COVID, and let's see his COVID shield.
COVID shield. I'm sorry.
No, you'll see him. He's walking, and he just wore so much protective gear. It was ridiculous.
Like he was going into a plutonium, to go.
Anyhow, there he is. Yeah.
What the?
Yeah. So like he's really good. He's doing a fist pump there. I mean, anyhow,
what's he got, a mask on and a spit protector or whatever?
So here's the point. In the end, the military is going to say, listen, we were following the CDC. And the CDC is going to say, listen, we said they didn't stop transmission. Finger point, right? You're going to see the White House task force saying, listen, we were pushing the vaccines because we were told they reduce hospitalization and death. And the FDA is going to say, we never granted that claim. Can't you see the finger pointing already? When it comes to death, people are going to say, Pfizer, you should have pulled this off the market. Pfizer's going to say, listen, you guys pre-purchased these vaccines. It was your program. We were just the suppliers.
You allowed it to happen.
Yeah, you were the suppliers. Then the FDA and CDC, which are running the vaccine program, they're going to say, well, Pfizer had all the data. They didn't tell us. I mean, you can see the finger pointing right now. Deborah Birx, a former White House task force member, came out and said, we knew these vaccines weren't going to work. When she said that, people were like, what? She goes, oh, we know the majority of people in the hospital are fully vaccinated. What?
What'd you say?
Yeah, I mean,
can you say that again?
So
can I get that on record?
You can see this. So this week or the last 2 weeks has been the movie The Real Anthony Fauci. So this is a book written by Robert F. Kennedy. I'm the most mentioned doctor in the book, and I had a chance to try to edit the best I could. The book came out at light speed, and now the movie, and you'll see that I'm in the movie.
Congratulations!
Thank you.
You deserve it.
But Anthony Fauci.
Interesting.
How in the world can we have a division head at the NIH, which is not a high position, have somebody rise to this level of power and authority, not granted, he's not in any position that actually grants that authority, unelected, unreviewed, and have a situation where it's towards the end of his career. He actually announces that he's leaving.
Yes.
Okay, listen to this. He announces that he's leaving. I told Dan Bongino this. And Dan nearly fell out of his chair. And he writes his goodbye letter on the NIH website. I'm leaving. Here's my storied career. It's about 2 pages on the internet. No mention of COVID. How does that happen? His signature thing he's done in the last 3 years, what he'll forever be known for, is COVID.
That should be the pinnacle, right? Supposedly.
No mention. What does that tell you?
It tells you he's a real idiot, is what it tells you. And then he's completely wrong.
What we've just reviewed is the biggest crime of our lifetimes, of this century. What could be the biggest crime of all time? It's a crime. John Leake, who I wrote the book with, it took us a year to write the book, best-selling author. It's the only COVID book that's actually written by a pro, so it really reads. It's a page-turner. Everybody should pick it up on Amazon. It's a page-turner. You can read it in 2 or 3 hours. And it's big print, and it's a story. So it's not a medical book. It's a story, and it's got characters in it. All the characters you'd know. You've seen me on TV. You've seen Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, Joe Rogan. How did all this happen? What we are saying is this. The crime is the suppression of early treatment. In the first book, suppression of early treatment. The victims are 10 million Americans who are hospitalized and 1 million Americans who lost their lives. That's with COVID. The perpetrators are what we call the biopharmaceutical complex. This is hard to put your mind around. The biopharmaceutical complex is a syndicate, and they've come together, working together as a syndicate. And we think at the top, believe it or not, is the World Economic Forum. And right with them is the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, and the Rockefeller Foundation. Gates and WEF in 2017 form a center, a vaccine incubator called CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation. And CEPI says there will be infectious disease pandemics, and we will orchestrate all this, and there will be one response, mass vaccination. That's all laid out. That's in the inner core. But now we add on to it Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance, UNITAID, the Chinese Communist Party. We add in the government agencies, CDC, NIH, FDA, the MHRA in the UK, TGA in Australia, EMA, all the agencies, the pharmaceutical vaccine suppliers. They are all working together as a syndicate. And the crimes they're committing are two. One is fraud. They've defrauded the world. And two is mass negligent homicide. And one of the biggest steps in fraud is to declare a global emergency and a national emergency. Now, President Biden, within the last few days, has just extended the U.S. national COVID emergency. Now, listen, I just flew here. I went through busy airports. People are all over the place. People are sitting next to each other on the planes. People are eating in restaurants. There is no health emergency with COVID right now. There's some cases, and doctors can handle it, just like there's no health emergency for staph infections or anything else. We're doing our usual work. Doctors decide health emergencies, not the President of the United States. So it's a false, fraudulent claim that we're under a national emergency. By the way, same president has declared we're under a national emergency for monkeypox. Do you feel any monkeypox?
Remember Roger Stone told us?
Do you feel a monkeypox emergency in this building or anywhere around? No. Do you in the airport, or is anybody worried about monkeypox? These are fraudulent actions, and by declaring these emergencies, there's no voting, there's no accounting reconciliation, there's no oversight. The doors of treasuries are opened, and the money flows. It flows to this syndicate like you've never seen before. 10% of the U.S. GDP flowed out of the Treasury to all the recipients, the stakeholders of this biopharmaceutical complex. We believe everybody now is bathing in money. It's a crime. It's a crime. What was the motive for the suppression of early treatment? I think we've established it today. It was to promote these vaccines.
Yeah, right from the beginning. Right from the beginning. You know how they were talking, and I don't want to, drive you nuts, but they were saying, remember they were saying for 1 minute that maybe it came from the U.S. and not the Wuhan lab. Then, it was, they were doing that back and forth talk. Was that just another spin?
The publications are very clear on this. One of the best books, why don't you pull it up, is Peter Breggin, Breggin. Go to the website, We Are the Prey. Peter Breggin published a book. It's far and away the most comprehensive book, far more comprehensive than Courage to Face COVID-19 or the Robert F. Kennedy book. And it's called COVID-19 and the Global Prayers, We Are the Prey. I wrote one of the introductions for it. It outlines this entire plan. The U.S. has biological, here's the book, U.S. has biological threat programs. We've had a SARS program. We have an anthrax program. We have a smallpox, monkeypox program. The NIH division is called BARDA. The military division is called DARPA, where we work on the threat and we work on the counter threat. It's a part of our national security. Okay. What Bregan outlines is after the first SARS pandemic, it was understood this could be a national threat. So we intentionally worked on SARS in order to come up with solutions. We brought over Chinese scientists, the University of Texas Medical Branch in Galveston. She helped do some research, kind of juice the virus. Under President Obama, there was a prohibition of gain-of-function research. So now we knew the research could not be done in the United States. It had to be offshore. The kingpin in this is Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's the most knowledgeable person on coronavirus. He's been publishing on this since the early 90s. Haven't even heard him
since the early 90s.
He hasn't even uttered a word. He's been called a couple times for testimony. But Ralph Barrick's the quietest man in the country right now. Barrick and his team had grants through the National Institutes of Health to supercharge SARS-CoV-2, to actually make it biologically far more infectious and far more dangerous. And it was U.S. engineered. And in 2 papers, first author is Menachery, someone who worked for him. Barrick's the senior author. The title of the papers appeared in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Proceedings, Nature Communications and Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And in these papers, the title of the paper is The Emergence of SARS-CoV-2 in Human Populations. They were getting ready. 2015, these are published. So it's a U.S. government operation, and it's published in the peer-reviewed literature. It's very important. Published in the peer-reviewed literature, and the work is done in Wuhan, China. So the virus is actually intentionally manipulated through U.S. research, but work done in the lab in Wuhan, China. It's very important. It's all documented. It's all documented.
So it got spun around
in the peer-reviewed literature. And there's the Menachery papers here. The Bregan book outlines all this.
Wow.
This is so interesting. This lab in Wuhan, China is a biosecurity level 4 lab, so it means it's a pretty high-level security lab. It actually is built for the Chinese by the French.
What?
Yeah, French. Jacques Chirac commissions a French company, bioMérieux, an in vitro diagnostics company, to outfit this the Annex lab. The billionaire CEO of bioMérieux at the time, Stéphane Bainzel. Bainzel leads bioMérieux. He helps the Chinese build the lab, and in 2011, he resigns from bioMérieux, and 5 days later, he joins as the CEO of Moderna. And Moderna has 1 employee at the time. Bainzel and Moderna start working with the NIH to co-patent the Moderna vaccine. So the Moderna patent is written before COVID even comes out of the lab. Barrick and Menachery are basically engineering COVID. Now, in their papers, they're also working on a killed vaccine and monoclonal antibodies, but they're working with the Chinese. This is all preparatory. So when COVID-19 hits, in 2020, Bainzel and Moderna, 3 to 4 or 5 days after the announcement that there's an emergency, says, we got a vaccine. It's like, how do you get a vaccine in 3 days?
Warp speed. It's ready.
Yeah, I mean, this is all in the open. Trump didn't invent the vaccines. This isn't a Trump accomplishment. This was done long before Trump. Peter Bregan chronicles this. This goes back to 2012. There were 36 pandemic preparedness planning events. This was planned that this could happen. 2012. And there are 25 of them that actually have written documents. It's all laid out. 6 of them are recorded. They're video recorded. One of them is Event 201, where they sit down. The head of the Chinese CDC sits down with U.S. leaders, and they go over what we're going to do. It's going to happen. It's going to be released, and whatever. This is all in the open. That's what Bregan is saying. Pay attention to this. What people are doing is all in the... There's no secret memos here. This is all in the open. When Klaus Schwab, who leads the World Economic Forum, which seems to be doing everything but economics. I mean, I've been on Laura Ingraham. I said, why aren't they worried about global inflation or currency rates or whatever? They seem to be far too interested in human engineering and other things. But when Klaus Schwab publishes The Great Reset, a few months into this, and he says COVID-19 is going to be a narrow but important opportunity to reset a new world order. Pay attention to it. Why wouldn't we pay attention to this? Why wouldn't we pay attention to these public utterances? He publishes it. He says, we're going to try to do it. So when Majid Nawaz comes from the UK over and meets with Rogan, and he lays this out for Rogan, and he said, listen, why not pay attention to this? When he said digital currency systems and social credit scores and vaccine passports and all this totalitarian control coming down through all the Western democracies, and what Klaus Schwab describes as the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and this is all really happening, why wouldn't we pay attention to this?
I don't know.
And Rogan's jaw is dropping on the floor. Yeah, I think the hardest thing to realize is this is all in the open.
And we saw that. Remember, we looked that up with the, I believe it's in China, where they were talking about basing your credit off your browsing.
Across your browsing history.
I mean, everything he said is just one by one, check, check, check.
But how he laid it out, and I give Peter Bregan credit for it, how he put it together, and the timeline explains why we haven't hit China. If we hit China and say, oh, it's the China virus, China's going to say, no, it isn't. It's your project. It was your NIH grants. It was your innovation. There's like 2 Chinese authors on the second minute cherry paper. So listen, these are all U.S. people. It says it's University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Harvard, a Swiss institute. You guys were working on this. You used our lab, but you guys are doing, this is your project. It's not the China virus. I think China is interesting for a couple of reasons. I've been to China 5 times, so I know a little bit about the country. Is look at the reaction to this. There are newsreels of the Chinese wearing hazmat suits. They're wearing hazmat suits, tackling each other. There's a newsreel where there's one guy spraying the other guy's shoes as if COVID comes off his shoes. They've literally lost their minds. I interviewed Eugenia Brentios from El Salvador, really great lady, tiny little thing. She's treated thousands of patients. And she uses something similar to the McCullough protocol. By the way, virtually no use of hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. Very lab-based approach, but innovative. I said, Dr. Brentios, have you ever worn a mask? She goes, no. I said, what do you think about the Chinese wearing hazmat suits? She goes, it's not Ebola. You don't get it from touching somebody. I mean, it's just, it's absolutely ludicrous. I've seen COVID patients. I've made house calls. I've never worn a hazmat suit. I mean, do you know there are people today, they've already had COVID, they're already through it, and they're wearing hazmat suits. It's just absolutely nuts.
I still see the face shields, and I just laugh.
Or how about the plexiglass? Where it goes up a certain level, as if the virus is not going to just.
You want a good one? There's a guy at the McDonald's not far from my house. I swear to God, he wears rubber gloves, and he wears. I shit you not. I should have a picture. He wears. When you go swim, like goggles, diving goggles. He has diving goggles on. I swear I'm gonna take a picture next time.
To this day, like right now, he still does.
Still wears it. Swear to God, I'll send it to him and he'll send it to you. You can see.
Rubber gloves kind of get me a little bit. I think they are so grossly overused. Let me give you an example. I just flew here. You guys were so nice to have me up in first class. So
thank you for coming.
I'm in first class, and this nice guy is, get me a cup of coffee. He puts on rubber gloves to pick up the cup when we're getting ready to land. Now, I got to tell you, I mean, I know he's trying to do his job, and maybe he's told to wear rubber gloves, but come on, man, if you're at home and you're going to take the cup of coffee and bring it to the sink, are you going to wear rubber gloves? I mean, haven't we extended things a little too much, right? I mean, rubber gloves to pick up a cup of coffee?
It's just nuts.
People have lost their mind.
They've lost their mind. They've been hypnotized by the media. I think they've been hypnotized by the media.
But there are people in parts of the world where they don't have that much media exposure. And I've had a chance to talk to people through Clubhouse and other methods. They've also lost their minds.
But they can take that VPN, go to the library, see U.S.
People have still lost their minds.
Yep.
They've lost their minds.
Everywhere.
They've lost their minds all over the world. There's something about...
I was trying to stick up for it.
I know, but what's happened all over the world is people have lost their minds. Now, it's true. Countries that stayed disconnected from things and just never bought into it, they did the best. Look at Haiti. Haiti's, a very poor country.
Yeah.
And didn't vaccinate anybody. They did great. The Central African countries, too poor to
did
get
really
vaccines.
good, right?
They did great. So the idea is, if you didn't buy into the vaccines, didn't buy into all this,
You're doing pretty damn
they're
good.
doing pretty good. Masks. People said, Dr. McCullough, do masks work? And I said, listen, you get a red hot COVID patient in the hospital, and you're going to take him to CT or X-ray. Wear a mask. Patient wears a mask. That's fine. The CDC currently says, if you're in healthcare and you're face-to-face with a COVID patient, wear a mask. I'm fine with that. The CDC says that now. That could have been our approach all the way through. Do you know that I'm in healthcare? I walk into a major medical center every day, and I've been wearing a mask. And the very first day that the CDC says, if you're not directly dealing with COVID, you don't need to wear a mask, I said, hallelujah. I walked in, no more mask. I felt great. I got to the office. They said, where's your mask? I said, the CDC says it doesn't need it. We've always followed the CDC. We're not following the CDC anymore. Wear your mask. So it's so interesting. People followed the CDC when they wanted to follow the CDC, but now that the CDC is relaxing, they don't want to relax.
You probably wanted to do a cartwheel.
But I'm still wearing a mask because we're no longer following the CDC. Another interesting observation is there's almost an inverse of public health and employment risk and mitigation measures. So let's take some financial services companies. Do you know there's some financial services companies where they're still not back at the office? They're like, still too much of a COVID threat. We need to do this from home, or just kind of carefully meter in one or two people. A couple token people can be in the office because they're afraid of the COVID threat. And those companies, you got to take the vaccine. Even if you're at home, you've got to take the vaccine. And if you don't take the vaccine and you're at home, you've got to take a test every week. And people are saying, wait, I'm at home. I'm not even going to the office. So like financial services companies, right? Now you got Starbucks. You got these tiny little coffee shops, people coming in, coughing, hacking, sneezing. No mandates, no testing, no vaccines. What? If anybody's going to be at risk, it's going to be Starbucks.
They're packed constantly.
Right? They're packed.
The tables are like this because they got Wi-Fi for free. People go there all the time.
So Starbucks is packed, and there's no vaccines, no mandates. And financial services companies, they're so petrified they can't come into the office. You can't make this stuff up. Historians are going to write about this.
They are.
Just this group think. I had a patient of mine as a student. He's down at University of Texas in Austin, and he's up for it. I'm examining him and talking to him. And I said, boy, what's it like being a college student during COVID? He goes, oh, it's terrible. He goes, we're on WebEx. It's boring. The classes are on WebEx. No one's paying attention. And, we're not on campus. They closed all the buildings. I said, God, it sounds horrendous. He goes, well, it's not bad. Once we get off WebEx, we're going to go to the bars and we're socializing. There's parties and we drink beer and we're dating and we're playing basketball. Yeah. I said, well, what's the purpose of shutting down college if you guys are going to screw around and have all this exposure? So again, it doesn't make sense.
It all contradicts, right?
It all contradicts. So
to like whatever is favorable at the moment, we're going to go with this, and then we're going to go back to whatever this is.
Well, because none of it makes sense.
None of it makes sense. None of it.
Even if these measures worked, it doesn't make sense. One can only conclude there must be some other agenda. There must be something. It can't be about COVID. Something's got to be in the minds of people other than COVID. So I'll give you some simple ones. One of them could be, listen, a lot of people like working from home. It's way easier. You don't have to drive in. No one's looking over your shoulder. There's less supervision for sure. And it's kind of easier. And you get paid the same. There's a lot of people who like to work from home. They really do.
A lot of benefits.
I mean, a lot of people do.
Yeah, and they got used to it.
At my institution, I used to lead this research team. And research team, we had about 9 people, 3 PhDs. We met and we interacted. We did research. We measured different tests and interfaced with doctors and all of this, published our papers, wrote grants, very productive. COVID-19 hits. Research team, we got to stay at home. Nope, we're not essential. We're not going in. Okay. Then we start having weekly meetings, and productivity starts to drop off. And then, listen, we got to get research grants. If we don't get research grants, their jobs go away. Then productivity's less. And then, no, we're not meeting this week, and on and on and on. I never saw them again. It's 3 years. I've never seen these people again. They literally are gone. Their jobs evaporated. All the research fell apart. We just gave up.
So that wasn't an emergency job, but the liquor store is still open.
Yeah.
How about this one? I had a chance to go to Central Louisiana. Everyone's got to go there at least once, outside of Baton Rouge. And I went to the Tabernacle Life Church. And I had a chance to meet Tony Spell. And let me tell you, Tony Spell is a son of a gospel preacher. And Tony Spell is a preacher himself. And this is a non-denominational church. And when COVID-19 hit, they had Walmart open and they had the liquor store open, but they said, you got to shut down your church. He goes, I'm not doing it. They said, you have to. He goes, I'm not doing it. They came down that road and they said, you're shutting down your church. He goes, I'm not doing it. They said, we're taking you to jail. He put on his best suit and tie. He brought his Bible and his hymnal. He goes, I'm going to jail.
That's what
and
I'm
Tony
talking about,
Spell
right?
went to jail and he sang hymns and he stayed in jail. And I met Tony in his parsonage. We prayed. He showed me all the plaques of his imprisonment. And Tony Spell is a white man who sings with the soul of a black man. He says, I've been to jail and I ain't going back. And I met Tony and I met his dad. And I said, and the guy who coordinated was Woody Jenkins, who's a former state senator, great journalist, senior man. And I said, you know what? COVID-19 has been a great revealing of character. It's been a great revealing of conviction, a great revealing of common sense, a great revealing of courage. And I can tell you right now, I don't even get a bad email. I don't have a single chief of medicine, not a single chief of infectious disease, not a single agency doctor even send me a text saying, Dr. McCullough, I disagree with you. I don't like what you're doing. They don't have the courage. They don't have the integrity. And I testified with Steve Kirsch. You got to have him on. Steve is a great
Winning.
guy. Steve Kirsch is a multimillionaire who's going nuts on this. Everybody in Silicon Valley is kind of with this false narrative, except for Steve Kirsch. He took the vaccine. He started seeing people injured. He said, this stuff is bad stuff. What's going on? He reached out to me. He started a vaccine research foundation. And you know what Steve said? Steve said, listen, he goes, these guys got to talk. These guys who are supporting the vaccines, they got to sit down with people like Dr. McCullough and others, and we got to talk. So Steve said, listen, we're going to have a round table, have Peter McCullough, have Pierre Corey, have some other doctors there, and let's have some of these doctors from academia. Clearly somebody must want these vaccines. Get somebody from CDC, NIH, FDA. He goes, I'll pay $1 million if you show up. Nobody. He said $2 million. Nobody. $5 million. Nobody.
$5 million?
He said $10 million or name your price. Will you show up at a round table and just discuss these vaccines? If you think they work and they're safe, make the case. No one will show up. I said, Steve, we got to put that in the record. And we testified in the Pennsylvania Senate, and we put it in the record. No one in this country really believes these vaccines are safe and effective. No one does. No one does. Not even for $10 million. Not even the most junior NIH official. Someone just tell me they can go retire on that. They could fake it. No one has the guts to even sit down and fake it and look me in the eye.
If that was anything else, and somebody turned down the $10 million, you'd see on every news station, oh, he wouldn't go for $10 million for Z-Pack or, whatever. They'd be like, well, what's wrong with Z-Pack? Never even heard about it, which you should have, because you guys are like the top doctors in the world.
Isn't it astonishing?
It's the whole thing.
So these doctors will lord over their patients in the exam room saying, you need to take the vaccine. And I tell them, listen, why don't you go collect $10 million and face Dr. McCullough? They don't have the guts. They don't have the guts because we go over every piece of data. And what
are you
going
to say?
What would you going to say?
There's nothing you can say. That's why they can't take the $10 million. Because they will have no credibility left. Whew.
That was
That was a jaw dropper.
Yeah, I mean that's up there in the top podcasts we've ever done here at MScs Media. I'm telling you, yeah, incredible stuff. Just
It's mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing.
What we've discussed today is a mind-blowing reality. Every day people are saying, I can't believe this is really happening.
I can't believe it either. And I've been following it. I've been following you, Dr. Malone, all you guys. Like, I've really been following it and interested in it. But now when I hear this go from beginning all the way back around and all who's involved, it is like, whoa, 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 whoa. And real easily you can go down that dark hole. Like they call it the Alex Jones.
Did we discuss a single conspiracy?
No, absolutely not.
All we did was just discuss the data.
Just the data.
Just the data. Just laying it out there. Everyone wants to know. Tucker Carlson asked me this. Joe Rogan asked me this. They go, who's behind this? Who's doing this? And what I said is, think of the naivety of this question. Only Dr. McCullough knows the worldwide plot.
Yeah.
Only I know. They only told me and nobody else. No, of course I don't know.
You're the lucky one.
Of course I don't know. I'm horrified. I don't even want to really know who's doing this. I really don't want to know. I just want it to end and wrap this thing up. I got to tell you, I'm extremely confident that I could wrap this thing up. If they turned the keys to me over to me tomorrow, I'd set the teams. We'd end this thing. The emergency.
I hope somehow,
and end this thing.
It happens. And I'm sorry for any of the BS you got to deal with in the news and them coming after you. It's just ridiculous.
Well, let me tell you how threatened I am. Do you know the toughest attacks I get? You know who attacks me? Anonymous
trolls.
Fact checkers. I don't even know who these people are. They'll say, Dr. McCullough said this. Fact checked. False. Says who? Who are these people? I mean, are they electronic bots?
Yeah,
are
probably.
they? I mean, I'm still waiting for, the chairman of medicine at Northwestern University says Dr. McCullough's wrong. Let's see it. Right? Instead, it's some bot. It's probably a Russian bot.
You got to wait for the bot to be able to talk back to you a little bit more.
Instagram. I mean, there's probably some kid somewhere in Eastern Europe hitting a button saying, let's send 40,000 bots to McCullough and refute. Something is going on through social media and through the mainstream. And by the way, the mainstream media is very involved in this. Do you know there's thousands and thousands of TV stations and radio stations? They never gave an update on how to treat COVID. They never did.
No, they don't.
They never had hospital CEOs on to discuss mortality statistics. They never had doctors on to review safety and efficacy of vaccines. They're all part of this, thousands and thousands of them. It never occurred to them. Elizabeth Warren, a senator, she had a sister or brother die of COVID. It never occurred to her that maybe the death was because of lack of treatment of COVID. Sean Casten's daughter dies, and he doesn't come out and say, my daughter took the vaccine and she dies. I mean, people are in a form of a trance right now that they must feel uncomfortable. They must feel remorseful. They must feel something. But they're in an altered reality. When a father loses a perfectly healthy 17-year-old child, and there's no outrage, there's no inquisitiveness, there's no remorse. There must be
numbness somewhere.
Somewhere
from somehow.
Doctors are numb. Doctors are numb. Doctors, the vast majority of doctors took the vaccines. The vast majority, either voluntarily or they were forced on them. But I'll tell you, virtually every doctor took them. It is nearly impossible for a doctor who's taken the vaccine to recognize that the vaccine caused a problem in the patient in front of them. It's virtually impossible. I'll give you an example. John Leake, my co-author, a gal he knows who lives on one of the islands in the UK, takes the vaccine. She starts to get this lymphomatous reaction where the lymph nodes get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and in the breast and the axilla, and it keeps going and going up the neck. And she has trouble breathing. It gets worse and worse, and they airlift her in, and she's at St. Mary's in London. She sees a bazillion doctors. They do biopsies. This thing is a mess. The doctors say, we don't know what this is. It's not cancer, but it's not an infection. We keep checking. We don't know what it is, but we know one thing. it's not due to the vaccine. Wait a minute. If they don't know what it is,
How do you know that?
It's not the vaccine. You know, this thing ultimately crushes her carotid artery. She has a stroke. I mean, this is a mess. And I can tell you, doctor after doctor tell patients they don't know what these diseases are, but it's not due to the vaccine. I've had these in my office. Why aren't doctors open-minded that when these things are coming out, of course it's due to the vaccine? The vaccine loads the spike protein in all the organs. In the Pfizer dossier, 1,291 new diseases are formed by these vaccines.
New diseases.
New diseases. I'm telling you, anything is due to these vaccines. Of course, their lymph node swelling is due to the vaccine. That's where she took the shot in the arm.
When you say new diseases, that's scary.
That's fucked up.
Yeah, these immunologic diseases, skin rashes. A woman on Monday showed me a skin rash, the most horrific skin rash you'd ever see. It looked like she was scalded. She looked like something.
She was like in a burn fire.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, these horrendous diseases. On my Substack, nuanced seizures. A guy who we know, a contractor, a wonderful guy, he's up on a hotel roof. He starts having seizures. He nearly falls off. Fortunately, a coworker saves him. He has a concussion. He breaks his ribs. It's a mess. He asks the question, can it be due to the vaccines? Well, of course. It's been reported that the vaccines cause nuanced seizures. The vaccines cause blood disorders, neurologic problems. It just keeps going. Whatever the vaccine goes, it causes problems.
That is unbelievable. I mean, if you're not at a loss for words after this, you're just, you know what? If you're not at a loss for words, you're not a human being.
Yeah.
You're just not.
And buckle up and see what the future holds too, because who knows? We don't know, I guess, like you're saying. We don't know. 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, who knows?
Well, Mr. McCullough, I hope you make another trip for me and come back and give me an update.
Awesome stuff, man.
Awesome stuff.
Yeah,
so, you know, please come back. What a great conversation.
Yeah.
So fun.
Thanks for having me.
And you're funny. You got one hell of a sense of humor, too. So don't let him fool you. He's a funny guy. Okay. And he works out.
Okay.
This podcast is brought to you by Liquid IV. This is a product I always use after I run, work out, and do the sauna. It's a great way to hydrate the body and feeling your best self. All you do is 1 stick of Liquid IV and 16 ounces of water. It hydrates the body faster and more efficient than water alone. 3 times the electrolytes as other sports drinks and contains 5 essential vitamins: B5, B12, B3, B6, and vitamin C. It also tastes great. Flavors like watermelon, lemon lime, strawberry, and many more. Buy in bulk at Costco or go to liquidiv.com and use the code MSCS Media, no space, for 15% off. No other way to hydrate the body.